Chapter 1187. Nie Tian detected Qin Yang's intentions and immediately became nervous. If Han Ling really broke down because of a few words from him, that would be terrible. If Han Ling really committed suicide, even if Nie Tian made a move to stop it, that also showed that the former was already utterly disheartened. Wanting to recover Sword Dao Will anew was very difficult. At this moment, countless people's gazes were looking at Han Ling, seemingly anticipating the scene of the latter brandishing his sword and committing suicide. Han Ling lowered his head and did not move at all. What? Don't even have the courage to commit suicide? Qin Yang laughed coldly, provoking Han Ling with words once more. He did not dare to kill Han Ling, but if the latter committed suicide in humiliation, then it was none of his business. Right at this time, Han Ling suddenly raised his head, terrifying determination flickering in his two eyes, staring fixedly at Qin Yang. A hint of a strange smile curled up at the corners of his mouth as he said solemnly, "People like me don't need courage to die. Only living needs courage. Even ants live without purpose, let alone that I'm still a person." Amen? Qin Yang detected the determination in Han Ling's eyes and was immediately stunned. He did not expect that the other party could still have the courage to carry on living under this kind of situation. When Nie Tian heard Han Ling's words, he heaved a long sigh in relief inwardly. Sometimes, dying was very simple. What was difficult was living on. When everyone was pessimistic about you, living on was the thing that required the most courage. Being able to see this point clearly, Han Ling's martial Dao Will became stronger. Han Ling, looks like I underestimated you. Qin Yang's expression was extremely grim. Not being able to kill Han Ling made him very displeased. Suddenly, Han Ling's gaze flickered, and he said calmly, "Qin Yang, I, Han Ling, officially issue a life and death challenge to you today." Life and death challenge? The crowd's gazes suddenly trembled, disbelief on their faces, as if suspecting whether they heard wrongly or not. A second-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist challenging a sixth-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist. Wasn't this courting death? Qin Yang was first stunned, then started laughing wildly, as if he heard a very hilarious joke. Han Ling, this is you courting death yourself. Can't blame this young lord. Qin Yang had enough laughing and said sinisterly, a pair of cold eyes releasing a malicious divine light. He did not dare to kill Han Ling in public, but if Han Ling took the initiative to challenge him and died in the life and death ring, then there would be no problem. With Mo Qianjuan's personality, he would never cause trouble for Guan Jianhai. After all, life and death duels were all up to fate. No matter what happened, neither side could take revenge. Senior brother. Pu Fifan only reacted after a long time, and his small face was filled with astonishment. Nie Tian frowned. He did not expect Han Ling to make such a move, but once he said it, there was no turning back. Qin Yang, in 2 months, you and I will fight to the death on the Sword Dao platform in Tianhuang City. Life and death will be up to fate. Han Ling said in a deep voice, his face unusually firm. All right. Qin Yang smiled deeply. 2 months was just right. By that time, he would have probably come out of the ancient sword tomb, and his strength would have improved a lot. As for Han Ling, he didn't even have the qualifications to enter the ancient sword tomb. So what if his strength increased? 2 months. Nie Tian let out a long breath. Fortunately, Han Ling was not too impulsive. 2 months was enough for him to help Han Ling improve his strength. No matter what, Nie Tian would never let Han Ling die in the hands of Qin Yang. Han Ling, the matter between us will end here for now. Qin Yang glanced at Han Ling coldly, and then turned his eyes to Xiao Yun and said, Brat, it's time for the matter between us. Okay, how do you want to deal with it? Xiao Yun smiled faintly, looking indifferent. Xiao Yun completely stayed out of everything that had happened just now, as if it had nothing to do with him. Now that Qin Yang had provoked him, of course, he could not continue to stay out of it. Brat, you have never heard of Guan Jianhai. This young master will let you see the method of Guan Jianhai. Qin Yang smiled coldly, and then his whole body's sword intent soared. The crimson sword intent burned like a flame, and the surrounding space immediately became hot, directly turning into a furnace. Han Ling's eyes darkened. He wanted to say something but was stopped by Nie Tian. The battle between Qin Yang and Xiao Yun, it was hard to say who would win and who would lose. Golden Sun sword intent. The crowd saw the crimson flames surging around Qin Yang and shouted. This was the Golden Sun sword intent of the Qin clan of Guan Jianhai. It was extremely terrifying, and it was an extremely rare bloodline sword intent. When the sword intent was strong to a certain extent, it could form a bloodline and be passed down through the bloodline. The Golden Sun sword intent of the Qin clan is a dual attribute sword intent of gold and fire. It is indeed true. Nie Tian faintly smiled as he felt the sword intent around Qin Yang. In addition to being a bloodline sword intent, the Golden Sun sword intent also had another strange characteristic, which was that it was a dual attribute sword intent, the hardness of metal and the heat of fire. The Golden Sun sword intent of the Qin clan, interesting. Xiao Yun smiled faintly, still not putting Qin Yang in his eyes. Brat, you are courting death. Qin Yang's eyes darkened, and the anger in his eyes was replaced by murderous intent. He was the 51st swordsman on the Sky Sword ranking. How could he tolerate being looked down by a young swordsman? Boom! Qin Yang struck with his sword, and the void trembled slightly. The air became misty, and the surrounding space was suddenly tightened. A blazing flame whizzed out like a fire snake, attacking Xiao Yun. This was a restaurant, and the space was crowded. Qin Yang didn't use a huge sword move. Plus, he thought that killing Xiao Yun would only take one move, and there was no need for a huge sword move. Nie Tian was slightly nervous. If Xiao Yun couldn't block Qin Yang's sword, he, Han Ling, and the others might be affected. Xiao Yun was very calm, and he didn't use his sword. Instead, he struck with his palm, and suddenly, a water curtain appeared in the air, forming a water shield, and absorbed Qin Yang's sword. Absorbed. It really absorbed Qin Yang's sword. This. The crowd couldn't help but gasp when they saw this, and they were so shocked that they couldn't say a word. How is this possible? Qin Yang was also stunned, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Here you go. Just at this moment, Xiao Yun's voice resounded. A fiery sword intent shot out from the water shield and attacked Qin Yang. Qin Yang was caught off guard, and he was slightly stunned. He struck out with his sword, and blocked the flame sword essence, but he was blasted back a few steps, and looked very embarrassed. The Golden Sun sword essence is really not bad, fierce enough. Xiao Yun smiled faintly, and looked at Qin Yang with a ridiculing expression, full of provocation. The crowd was completely stunned at this time, and they looked at Xiao Yun dumbfoundedly. They had no idea what was going on. What was the water shield that Xiao Yun used? It was too strange, and it could actually absorb Qin Yang's sword essence, and it could also attack Qin Yang. This is... Qin Yang was stunned, and then he thought of something. A trace of fear flashed in his eyes, and he said with a trembling voice, "Still water sword essence." Chapter 1188. Heavenly Wasteland Restaurant, in a private room on the second floor. The two old men looked surprised, evidently extremely shocked. The two did not expect that the legendary still water sword intent would appear again. It took a long time for the two to calm down and remain silent for a long time. Still water abyss, Shangguan clan, I didn't expect the appearance of the ancient sword tomb to alarm them. The gray-robed old man said in a low voice, his eyes flashing with a strange light. No wonder this boy can reach such strength at such a young age. He is from the Shangguan clan of the still water abyss. It seems that the opening of the ancient sword tomb has alarmed a lot of people. The black-robed old man's face was gloomy, the corners of his mouth curved into a strange smile from time to time, as if he was thinking about something. Downstairs. The crowd was still in a daze, unable to react for a long time. The scene just now was too strange. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed it. Boy, you are. Qin Yang finally calmed down a little, but his voice was still trembling. You are from the Shangguan clan of the Still Water Abyss. I didn't know that you know quite a lot. Xiao Yun smiled faintly, took a sip of tea and said, I am indeed from the Still Water Abyss, but I am not from the Shangguan clan. Not from the Shangguan clan? Qin Yang was taken aback. Then how do you know the Still Water Sword intent? This is my business. Do I need to tell you? Xiao Yun smiled faintly, a calm look on his face. Qin Yang's pupils suddenly shrank, not knowing what to say. At this moment, Nie Tian looked at Xiao Yun, the corners of his mouth curved in a faint smile. He didn't expect Xiao Yun to be from the Still Water Abyss. This was interesting. The Still Water Abyss was one of the 9 major sword sects, but it had disappeared for many years, and even in Nie Tian's previous life, swordsmen of the Still Water Abyss rarely appeared. The appearance of Xiao Yun indicated that the Still Water Abyss had reappeared and seemed to be interested in the ancient sword tomb. The Still Water sword intent was a very strange sword intent. It was rumored that when cultivated to the extreme, one could absorb any sword intent, copy any sword intent, and use it for oneself. Just now, Xiao Yun had used the Still Water sword intent to absorb Qin Yang's Golden Sun sword intent, and then copied the Golden Sun sword intent to counterattack Qin Yang. Nie Tian had only heard of the Still Water sword intent before, but had never seen it before. Now that he saw it, it was indeed very strange. Xiao Yun's strength was below Qin Yang's, and his sword Dao realm was also below Qin Yang's. However, he was able to directly absorb and copy Qin Yang's sword intent. It was truly strange. At this time, Nie Tian also understood. Xiao Yun had only been in the heaven realm for a few years, yet his strength could rise so quickly. It was definitely because of the Still Water Abyss. It had to be said that Xiao Yun's luck was very good, to actually be able to join the Still Water Abyss. Qin Yang's eyes shone brightly. Evidently, he was considering whether or not he should continue attacking. The Still Water sword intent was too strange. He was not sure that he could defeat Xiao Yun, and if he left now, it would seem very cowardly. Xiao Yun. Right at this moment, a clear voice suddenly resounded. Oh no! When Xiao Yun heard this voice, he was shocked, like a mouse seeing a cat. The crowd was taken aback for a moment, then turned their eyes to the source of the voice. A figure in purple appeared. It was a young woman in her 20s, with beautiful facial features and a heroic spirit. Xiao Yun, you married me, Shangguan Yufei, so you are a member of the Shangguan family. Why do you say that you are not a member of the Shangguan family? The figure of the woman in purple flickered, coming directly to Xiao Yun's side. The crowd was stunned. This woman was too fierce. No wonder Xiao Yun was so frightened just now. Nie Tian twitched the corner of his mouth. His eyes swept over Shangguan Yufei, and secretly said in his heart, This girl left, she is more overbearing than Gu Wuyo. Yufei, I am your person, but my surname is Xiao, not Shangguan. Xiao Yun was obviously very afraid of Shangguan Yufei, and said with a sullen face, If you are my person, then you are a member of the Shangguan family. What's the difference? Shangguan Yufei's pretty face was gloomy, and she glared at Xiao Yun. It's the same. If you say it's the same, then it's the same. Xiao Yun looked at Qin Yang helplessly. I'm sorry, I was wrong. I am a member of the Abyss of Still Water, and also a member of the Shangguan family. Qin Yang had a face full of black lines, completely unable to react. The person who used the Still Water sword intent to embarrass him just now was actually so afraid of his wife? That's more like it. Shangguan Yufei saw that Xiao Yun's attitude of admitting his mistake was not bad, and could not help smiling sweetly, her smile like a flower. Nie Tian looked at the two people in front of him with a speechless look. This was really a pair of weirdos. In fact, Shangguan Yufei's strength was not strong, only 3rd level Heavenly Emperor, and her sword Dao realm was also only sword soul. Xiao Yun was so afraid of her, obviously because he loved her. Alright. Let's go. Shangguan Yufei smiled, not wanting to stay here, and pulled Xiao Yun and prepared to leave. Big brother Han Ling, brother Nie Tian, brother Pu Fifan, I'll take my leave. Xiao Yun stood up, very seriously bidding farewell to Nie Tian and the others, and then left with Shangguan Yufei. The crowd looked at the two figures with a speechless look. Nie Tian shook his head and smiled, also feeling that these two people were very interesting in his heart. When Qin Yang saw that Xiao Yun had left, he didn't want to stay any longer. He glanced coldly at Han Ling and said in a deep voice, Han Ling, the life and death duel in 2 months will be the day you die. Finished talking, Qin Yang left. Nie Tian did not stop it. With his current strength, if he wanted to kill Qin Yang, he could kill him, but he did not want to do so, because this person had to be dealt with by Han Ling himself. Furthermore, Nie Tian already discovered that in a private room on the 2nd floor, 2 old men with powerful auras were watching everything. If Nie Tian made a move, it was very likely to expose his identity. Before entering the ancient sword tomb, Nie Tian tried not to make a move unless it was a last resort. Next, Nie Tian also did not plan to continue staying. These people looked at Han Ling with strange gazes. Although he did not care, it would also annoy him. The 3 left the Heavenly Wasteland restaurant, ready to find a place to stay, and wait for the news from the Heavenly Wasteland city to determine the people who entered the ancient sword tomb. This time, when the ancient sword tomb opened, even a hidden sword sect like the Abyss of Still Water appeared, so other swordsmen would definitely flock to the ancient sword tomb. The Heavenly Wasteland city would definitely have an extremely fierce sword principle competition. At this time, Pu Fifan pointed at several figures in front of them and shouted, "Senior brother, look, it's eldest senior brother and the others." Nie Tian looked over and saw several figures appear in front of them, led by a middle-aged man with a lean figure. His aura was restrained, but it still could not hide his sharp aura. His whole person looked like a sharp sword, extremely swift and fierce. "Ignore them." Han Ling frowned, but he did not want to pay attention to the people in front of him, and intended to go around them. Han Ling. However, it was already too late. The lean middle-aged man saw Han Ling and the others, and shouted, "You want to run after seeing eldest senior brother? Do you hate me, eldest senior brother?" Chapter 1189. The skinny middle-aged man walked over with a gloomy face. He looked at Han Ling with disdain, as if Han Ling was not his junior brother, but his enemy. Looking at the skinny middle-aged man's expression, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown and ask Pu Fifan, "Pu Fifan, is this your eldest senior brother?" "Yes. He is our eldest senior brother, Lu Haoyu." Pu Fifan nodded. It seemed that he didn't like this eldest senior brother. Eldest senior brother. Han Ling nodded and bowed. He greeted Lu Haoyu. No matter what, Lu Haoyu was his senior brother, and he had to show him respect. "Han Ling, teacher asked you to come to Tianhuang City to gain experience, not to make a fool of yourself." Lu Haoyu looked at Han Ling coldly and said in a deep voice, his face full of disdain and contempt, "Eldest senior brother, what do you mean?" Han Ling raised his head slightly. Even if Lu Haoyu was his senior brother, he couldn't say that to him. "What do I mean?" Lu Haoyu looked down and said, "You challenged Qin Yang to a life-and-death duel. Aren't you disgracing yourself? You're the only one who's throwing away the sect's face. I don't understand why teacher asked you to come to the Tianhuang mountain." Nie Tian frowned. Lu Haoyu was talking about Han Ling's life-and-death duel with Qin Yang. The news spread fast. Lu Haoyu knew it as soon as Nie Tian and the others came out of the Tianhuang restaurant. Actually, it was not strange. This kind of thing was spread from mouth to mouth. Soon, all the swordsmen in the Tianhuang city knew about it. "Eldest senior brother, this is my own business. It has nothing to do with the sect." Han Ling was angry, but he said calmly, "How dare you say it has nothing to do with the sect?" Lu Haoyu raised his eyebrows and said cold, "If you die in the hands of Qin Yang, all the swordsmen in the sword world will think that teacher's disciple can't beat the sword ocean. Isn't that a disgrace to teacher?" Han Ling felt suffocated. He couldn't vent his anger, so he didn't know how to defend himself. If he lost the duel with Qin Yang, it would damage Mo Qianjuan's reputation. "Eldest senior brother, you can't say that about senior brother Han." At this time, Pu Fifan couldn't stand it anymore and said, "As the eldest senior brother, you only know how to blame senior brother Han when he was humiliated and never thought of avenging him. Is this what an eldest senior brother should do?" Pu Fifan was young, but his words were powerful and resonant. If Lu Haoyu truly cared about the sect's reputation, he would defeat Qin Yang and reclaim the sect's reputation. However, he only knew how to blame Han Ling. What kind of eldest brother was he? Qin Yang had humiliated Han Ling, but Mo Qianjuan's status was different. He was a senior in the way of the sword. Of course, he couldn't do anything to Qin Yang. However, Lu Haoyu and Qin Yang were of the same generation. Why couldn't he do anything to Han Ling? Nie Tian could tell that Lu Haoyu's strength was also a 6th-level heavenly emperor. Furthermore, he was similarly at the middle-rank sword profound realm, the same strength as Qin Yang. Why did he not dare to fight the latter? "Pu Fifan, how can you talk to me like that?" Lu Haoyu was agitated by Pu Fifan's few words. His face immediately turned red. Following that, an ice-cold gaze stared at the latter and said coldly, "I'm your eldest senior brother. You must respect me. You follow by Han Ling's side every day. What prospects will you have when you grow up? Aren't you still the same as him? Becoming a cripple and can't even marry the woman you love." "Lu Haoyu, I forbid you to speak of senior brother Han Ling like this." Pu Fifan's gaze darkened, and he immediately became enraged, glaring fiercely at Lu Haoyu. In his heart, Han Ling was more like a senior brother than all the other senior brothers. "Pu Fifan, are you rebelling?" Lu Haoyu detected the fury in Pu Fifan's eyes and roared solemnly, "You dare to glare at me? This is showing no respect for elders. As the eldest senior brother, I'll teach you a lesson on teacher's behalf today. Kneel down for me." With a violent roar, Lu Haoyu's entire body released a massive oppressive aura, directly enveloping over toward Pu Fifan. "No." Han Ling sensed something amiss and immediately cried out in shock. Even if Pu Fifan was just a child, kneeling in front of so many people was also a kind of blow to his sword Dao willpower. Lu Haoyu as the eldest senior brother, Pu Fifan could kneel down for him, but absolutely not under this kind of situation. Enough. Right at this time, a furious roar sounded out. Nie Tian suddenly took a step out, sword momentum surging all over his body, akin to a hazy abyss breaking, directly breaking through Lu Haoyu's aura oppression. Amen? Lu Haoyu's gaze trembled slightly. Suffering the impact of the aura, he actually could not resist taking several steps back, his expression ugly to the extreme. "You? Who are you?" Lu Haoyu stabilized his figure. His gaze when looking at Nie Tian carried thick apprehension. In that instant just now, he actually felt a terrifying aura rise, making him feel a terrifying threat. When he sensed that Nie Tian's strength was only 4th-level Heavenly Emperor, he panicked even more instead. Not only did a 4th-level Heavenly Emperor break through his aura oppression, but he even directly blasted him back instead. It was seriously too bizarre. "Han Ling, let's go." Nie Tian completely ignored Lu Haoyu. His gaze swept over the surrounding people, and he turned around, preparing to leave. He did not wish to continue being entangled. He would only let people see a joke. Lu Haoyu was Mo Qianjuan's disciple. It was naturally impossible for Nie Tian to kill him. But this person made him very angry and could not be bothered to care. Amen. Han Ling nodded slightly and also prepared to leave. Lu Haoyu was the eldest senior brother after all. Those words that he said, Han Ling treated it as if he did not hear it. The three people immediately turned around and left. Bastard! Seeing that Nye Tian did not pay attention to him from start to end, Lu Haoyu felt that he suffered a tremendous humiliation. He suddenly roared angrily, the sword intent in his entire body suddenly erupted, directly condensing into a swift and fierce sword shadow, assaulting Nye Tian. The Heaven Realm's Divine Realm streets were all very wide, several hundred meters wide, accommodating martial artists to fight. Lu Haoyu's sword struck out. A terrifying sword shadow close to 1,000 meters long appeared. The limestone slabs on the ground directly shattered. The crowd felt the terrifying sword aura burst forth, quickly scattering to both sides. Be careful! Han Ling felt a fierce cold wind behind him and could not help crying out in shock. He did not expect that Lu Haoyu would actually really make a move on a fellow disciple. Amen. Nye Tian's brows tightened, the blood and qi in his body surging, his expression grim until it made one's heart palpitate. He originally did not want to fuss over it with Lu Haoyu, but the latter was too much, to actually attack in public. He really did not understand why Mo Qianjun, who was wise all his life, would take in such a muddle-headed disciple. Brat, since you don't know what's good for you, then I'll teach you a little lesson on Mo Qianjun's behalf. Nye Tian's heart suddenly sank and he said coldly. Following that, surging sword intent gushed out from his body, turning around and stabbing out with a sword. A clear sword hum sounded out, the void trembled slightly. Billowing sword intent roared out, terrifying sword shadows appeared in the air, fiercely pouncing out. In the blink of an eye, the terrifying power of the sword will erupted, and the destructive power burst forth, directly tearing apart and destroying the other sword shadow. Boom! The moment Nye Tian's figure turned around, the sword shadow landed a few meters above Lu Haoyu's head. Chapter 1190. Nye Tian's sword landed, directly destroying Lu Haoyu's sword, the sword shadow stopping above the latter's head. The scene that suddenly happened made the scene fall into deathly silence. Everyone's gazes looked at Nye Tian dumbfoundedly, a dumbfounded expression. Completely unable to believe that a fourth-level Heavenly Emperor-strength swordsman could actually erupt with such terrifying power under one sword. Lu Haoyu's figure froze, his entire body drenched in cold sweat, his face dumbfounded. Even if he was any dumber, he also knew that Nye Tian's sword clearly showed mercy. If this sword landed, his outcome would absolutely be even more tragic than that sword shadow, not even dregs would remain. But Lu Haoyu was really very surprised. Earlier, he clearly did not sense any sword intent surging aura on Nye Tian's body. Why was the latter able to release such a horrifying power in an instant? Under normal circumstances, swordsmen had to accumulate sword intent and essence energy before unleashing the sword. Although this process was very short, it was indispensable. Nye Tian seemed to have directly unleashed the sword and did not need to accumulate sword intent and essence energy at all. It was too bizarre. This person's means are so terrifying. After a moment, the crowd also discovered something amiss, their gazes becoming strange one after another. Most of the people present were swordsmen, but they completely did not understand this sword of Nye Tian's. Han Ling and Pu Fifan were the closest to Nye Tian and completely did not sense anything either, not knowing how Nye Tian did it. The power of the Dark Star ghostly kill is indeed terrifying. At this time, the corners of Nye Tian's mouth curled up slightly, secretly thinking to himself. He had long sensed that Lu Haoyu would make a move, so he used the Dark Star ghostly kill in advance. And he discovered that not only was the Dark Star ghostly kill soundless by itself, it even fused together with the sword intent and could greatly conceal the sword intent undulations, making the sword intent converge to the extreme. A sword that fused with the Dark Star ghostly kill directly routed Lu Haoyu, soundless, very terrifying. Such a sword, if used in a real life and death battle, it's absolutely fatal. Nie Tian was considerably shocked in his heart and became even more confident in the power of the Dark Star Ghostly Kill. By relying on the Dark Star Ghostly Kill, he could even instantly one-shot 6th level Heavenly Emperor, even 7th level Heavenly Emperor martial artists. Lu Haoyu's strength was already very strong, on the same level as Qin Yang. But he was still routed by Nie Tian in one move. Lu Haoyu. Nie Tian withdrew his sword intent, and the sword shadow above Lu Haoyu's head disappeared. He said coldly, "Even though you're the eldest senior brother, you don't act like one at all. When something happened, you blame junior brother for being trash and useless, but you don't think about seeking justice for junior. A senior brother, like you, are less than dog." After uttering these cold words, Nie Tian didn't want to stay any longer. He turned around and left. Han Ling and Pu Fifan were stunned for a moment. When they regained their senses, they immediately left. The crowd stared at Nie Tian's disappearing figure with astonishment and shock. "Tian," Lu said. Lu Haoyu stood rooted to the ground, and it took him a long time to react. He opened his mouth in a daze, and the expression in his eyes became complicated. Lu Haoyu asked in his mind. He seemed to be in a daze, not knowing what he was thinking. A questioning voice sounded in his heart, and his expression was somewhat dazed. It was unknown whether he was questioning or reflecting on himself. After Nie Tian and the other two left, they walked on the street with a heavy atmosphere. "Senior brother, will Tian be okay?" Pu Fifan asked worriedly, breaking the silence. Although Lu Haoyu was in the wrong, he was the Tian after all. Nie Tian's sword just now was a big blow to him, so Pu Fifan was worried. "Don't worry, I believe Tian will understand," Han Ling said, but there was some worry in his eyes. Actually, Lu Haoyu wasn't a bad person. It was just that the way he handled things was wrong. "I hope he can repent. If he can't even bear this little responsibility, he doesn't have to be the Tian," Nie Tian said plainly and stopped thinking about Lu Haoyu. Only now did he realize that Han Ling had a hard time all these years. If it weren't for him, Han Fei wouldn't have been captured and Han Ling wouldn't have suffered so much. Thinking of this, Nie Tian couldn't help but feel guilty. "Senior brother, what's in front?" At this moment, Pu Fifan suddenly cried out in surprise and pointed to the front. Nie Tian and Han Ling looked over at the same time. There were many people gathered on a huge square in front of them. It was very lively. Nie Tian and the other two immediately walked over, and everyone's eyes were attracted by a notice. "Sword Principal Competition." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he saw the 4 words written on the notice. It turned out that this was a notice posted by the Tianhuang city. The general idea was that in order to determine the swordsman who could enter the ancient sword tomb, the Tianhuang city was going to organize a sword principal competition with the other major sword sections. The top 100 swordsmen in the competition would be qualified to enter the ancient sword tomb. The sword principal competition this time wasn't just a simple sword principal competition. All the participating swordsmen would enter a designated area in the Tianhuang mountain range, the forbidden area of Tianhuang. They would kill each other and only 100 people would survive. What a cruel method! Nie Tian's eyes darkened after reading the notice. In order to enter the ancient sword tomb, countless swordsmen would participate in the sword principal competition, but only 100 swordsmen would be allowed to survive. This was no different from letting all the swordsmen gamble with their lives. Of course, one could directly give up after entering the forbidden area of Tianhuang, but who would give up so easily in order to enter the ancient sword tomb? This method of competition is indeed too cruel. Han Ling's eyes darkened as he said, "If there are cruel and bloodthirsty swordsmen participating in the competition, if they are strong enough, wouldn't they be able to kill at will?" "Yes." Pu Fifan also nodded and said with a conflicted expression, "Teacher said that some people cultivate the demon sword, which is a sword that specializes in killing people. The more people they kill, the stronger the sword intent." Nie Tian's eyes flickered. He didn't expect the 9 major sword sects to become so bloodthirsty. If it was to confirm the quota to enter the ancient sword tomb, it could be decided through martial arts. Why did they have to create such a sword principle competition? This was simply a sword principle competition for life. A conservative estimate was that there were tens of thousands of swordsmen who came to Tianhuang Mountain. Were they going to put all these Wanjian swordsmen into the forbidden area of Tianhuang Mountain, and only 100 people could come out alive? After the other swordsmen understood, they all looked indignant and criticized this method for being too cruel. Swordsmen have to kill people. Only by practicing a sword that kills can one be worthy of the sharpness of the sword. If you don't even have the courage to participate in the sword principle competition, what qualifications do you have to enter the ancient sword tomb? The sword principle competition is a game for the brave. You cowards, it's better not to participate. At this time, a different voice sounded. It was low and deep, but the voice seemed to have a magical power, resounding in everyone's ears. It was abnormally clear and as sharp as a sword. The crowd was suddenly stunned and looked at the person who spoke. It was a demonic man in a silver robe. His face was extremely gloomy, and his whole body was filled with a violent, murderous intent. This person was so arrogant, calling everyone cowards as soon as he opened his mouth. Chapter 1191. Yin Jiwei. When the crowd heard this name, their eyes couldn't help but tremble. So, the person who spoke was Yin Jiwei. No wonder he was so arrogant and ruthless. Yin Jiwei. At this moment, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He had heard this name once before, and he remembered it very clearly. Yin Jiwei was from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, and he was already engaged to Qin Yang's younger sister, Qin Yu. It was said that Yin Jiwei was once the #1 swordsman of the Earth Sword, and he was ranked 29th on the Heavenly Sword ranking. Nie Tian saw that Yin Jiwei was just over 100 years old, similar to Han Ling. It was indeed very impressive for him to be ranked 29th on the Heavenly Sword ranking at this age. Especially when compared to Han Ling, the gap between the two was really huge. It's him. Han Ling's eyes trembled slightly. Although he had never seen Yin Jiwei before, he knew the latter's relationship with Qin Yu. Seeing this person acting so arrogantly, it was easy to imagine how he felt. A bunch of ants. Yin Jiwei's gaze was cold as he looked at the crowd disdainfully. He berated without any scruples and prepared to turn around and leave. In his eyes, these swordsmen around him were not worthy of the title of swordsman at all. At most, they were a bunch of ant-like swordsmen. Being looked down upon by Yin Jiwei, everyone was infuriated, but they dared not say anything. They could only look at Yin Jiwei's departing figure hatefully. Yin Jiwei was arrogant, but he had the strength to be arrogant. His capabilities were already very terrifying, and with the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion behind him, there were only a handful of people who dared to provoke him. You call everyone ants? Aren't you being a little too arrogant? Just as Yin Jiwei's figure left, a discordant voice sounded. There was a hint of mockery in it. This voice was not loud, but everyone's gazes turned over. They saw that the person who spoke was a middle-aged swordsman in gray robes. He held a black broadsword in his hand and appeared very mighty. Nie Tian looked at the gray-robed swordsman. The latter was not weak. He was actually a 5th-level Heavenly Emperor, and he had reached the intermediate sword profundity realm. Yin Jiwei's eyes darkened slightly. He then turned around and looked at the gray-robed swordsman sternly. He sneered. Ant, repeat what you just said. So what if I say it again? The gray-robed swordsman was rather hot-blooded as he growled in a deep voice. Aren't you being too arrogant by treating all the swordsmen here as ants? Don't think that no one will dare to touch you just because you have the backing of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. This is Tianhuang City. No matter how powerful your Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion is, there's no way you can extend your claws here. When the crowd heard the gray-robed swordsman's words, they all nodded in agreement. Yin Jiwei's arrogance was too much, and he had provoked the public's anger. Really? However, Yin Jiwei did not care about the reactions of the others. He stared coldly at the gray-robed swordsman. A terrifying killing intent spread through the air, and everyone present felt a suffocating pressure. Courting death. Suddenly, Yin Jiwei's figure moved, and then a strand of murderous sword intent whistled out. It actually condensed into a silver human silhouette in midair, and it flickered like a ghost. Bang! The air trembled slightly, and after a muffled bang, the gray-robed swordsman was sent flying. When he landed on the ground, he had become a headless corpse. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Before anyone could understand what was going on, the gray-robed swordsman was already strangely decapitated. What was even more bizarre was that what flowed out from the gray-robed swordsman's head was not crimson blood, but silver blood. It was as if his blood had been contaminated by the silver sword intent, turning it silvery white. Yin Jiwei's sword was swift to the extreme, and it was merciless and murderous. It caught everyone off guard. No one expected Yin Jiwei to kill someone under the watchful eyes of the public, and even more so, no one expected his sword to be so bizarre. Silver Soul Sword Intent. When Ye Tian saw this scene by the side, his gaze couldn't help but tremble. He recognized that what Yin Jiwei released was the Silver Soul Sword Intent, the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion's Yin Clan's Bloodline Sword Intent. Silver Soul Sword Intent instantly killed a 5th-level Heavenly Emperor expert with a single strike. It was truly terrifying. This person's Silver Soul Sword Intent is very unique. It seems to have undergone some kind of mutation, and it's actually even sharper and more bizarre than the Silver Soul Sword Intent of solitary Silver City. Nye Tian secretly said in his heart. He could sense that Yin Jiwei's Silver Soul Sword Intent was different from ordinary Silver Soul Sword Intent. It was more murderous and sharp, and its power was even more terrifying. Solitary Silver City was precisely the pavilion master of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Nye Tian had exchanged blows with this person before, and by relying on the proud sword art's forbidden 3 moves, he gained a slight advantage. Yin Jiwei's appearance bore some resemblance to solitary Silver City. He should be his son. Yin Jiwei was not old. Although he was already over 100 years old, he was still very young for martial artists. To be able to cultivate such a terrifying Silver Soul Sword Intent at this age, Yin Jiwei's sword Dao talent was indeed astonishing. Ant! Yin Jiwei glanced at the corpse on the ground cold, smiled disdainfully, and said, "This is the consequence of talking too much." After saying that, Yin Jiwei's gaze swept across everyone and said, "Let me tell you guys, I, Yin Jiwei, don't need any big tree to support me. If anyone disapproves of my way of doing things, feel free to speak up. This person is an example." When the icy cold voice landed, everyone was silent like cicadas in winter. The scene was dead silent, without any sound at all. Yin Jiwei could even one-shot the gray-clothed swordsman with one sword. The rest's strength was basically inferior to the gray-clothed swordsman. How could they dare to show any dissatisfaction? A bunch of ants. Don't even have the courage to open your mouths and speak. Letting you all enter the ancient sword tomb is simply an insult to the ancient sword tomb. When Yin Jiwei saw that everyone did not speak, he could not help becoming even more insolent, sneering coldly over and over again. Nye Tian frowned slightly as he watched by the side, but did not make a move. Yin Jiwei's strength was 7th level Heavenly Emperor, his sword Dao strength reaching high rank sword profound meaning. He could be considered a pinnacle swordsman. If Nye Tian made a move rashly, he did not have confidence in defeating the latter. But the most important thing was that he did not wish to expose his identity. A violent and savage person like Yin Jiwei, if he entered Heaven Wasteland's forbidden region, he would definitely go on a killing spree, killing one on sight. Nie Tian reckoned that among the swordsmen who participated in the sword Dao struggle, there were absolutely few whose strength could contend with Yin Jiwei. Yin Jiwei was the 29th person on the Heavenly Sword Storm list. Apart from those old monsters who had concealed for a long time, he was virtually the Heaven Realm's Sword Dao's 29th swordsman. Such strength was indeed troublesome. People like Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing, these people, were naturally disdainful to take part in whatever Sword Dao struggle. Hence, in the Sword Dao struggle, those able to beat Yin Jiwei were scanty few. Letting Yin Jiwei into Heaven Wasteland's forbidden region was simply releasing a homicidal maniac. In the Heaven Realm, swordsmen like Yin Jiwei had no idea how many. Thinking up to here, Nie Tian could not help shaking his head slightly. Looks like the Sword Dao struggle this time was destined to be a bloody storm. Second uncle. But right at this time, a clear voice suddenly sounded out. Following that, a figure rushed out from the crowd. It was actually a 15 or 16 years old youth. Chapter 1192. The youth suddenly rushed out, a deep angry roar reverberating out akin to a clap of thunder. The rage in his entire body flared up, flames seemed to be surging around his body, burning the surrounding air. Fire attributes sword intent. The crowd's gazes trembled slightly, immediately recognizing that this youth was a swordsman too. Furthermore, it was fire attribute sword intent. The power of the sword intent was even very horrifying. This is... And right at this time, when Nie Tian saw the fire attribute sword intent on this youth's body, his gaze could not help suddenly turning sluggish, his expression somewhat stiff. The big ant is dead, and here comes another small ant? At the same time, Yin Jiwei's gaze looked at that flame-like youth coldly, undisguised killing intent surging in his eyes. The crowd sensed a sharp killing intent appearing in the space, their hearts involuntarily trembling. They all knew that this flame youth was going to die. Yin Jiwei was ruthless and bloodthirsty. How could he allow this youth to live? This child is only 15 or 16 years old, and his strength is actually second-level Heavenly Emperor. The fire attribute sword intent on his body is also very horrifying. If he dies just like this, it's truly a pity. Quite a few people suddenly noticed that the flame youth's strength was very horrifying and could not help saying regretfully, 15 or 16 years old, second-level Heavenly Emperor strength, Sword Dao realm-reaching sword soul, it was seriously very terrifying. Nie Tian also noticed this. This youth's Sword Dao talent was actually not beneath Pu Fifan's. Pu Fifan was only 12 years old currently. Wait another 3 or 4 years. He might not have the flame youth's strength either. Little bastard, your strength and talent are both pretty good. It's a pity that you ran into me. Yin Jiwei similarly detected the flame youth's strength, the coldness in his eyes becoming even thicker. The stronger the latter's talent, the thicker his killing intent. Such a youth, if he continued to grow, that would be terrifying. Yin Jiwei looked at the flame youth and smiled cold, revealing killing intent. It's you who killed my second uncle, I want your life. The flame youth immediately reacted. It was precisely this silver-clothed swordsman in front of him who killed his second uncle. Immediately, all the sword intent in his body suddenly erupted, a crimson flame longsword appearing in his hand. The sword intent around him gushed out explosively, turning into endless flames, burning in the space. The surrounding crowd actually could not withstand the roasting of this blazing flame, retreating and scattering one after another. A little ant dares to be so arrogant? Die. Yin Jiwei smiled coldly. The silver soul sword intent appeared around his body, and actually surged in clusters, extremely strange, like a silver ghost. He didn't even need to draw his sword to kill an ant like the flaming youth. Die. In the next moment, the cold voice fell and the silver spirit sword essence appeared again. It was like a sharp silver blade, flickering with a cold light, filled with murderous evil intent, and attacked the flaming young man. Be careful. At this moment, the hearts of the crowd suddenly tightened. Their hearts trembled violently. Such a talented young man had died so tragically. What a pity! I'll kill you! The flaming youth was actually fearless. He stabbed out with his scarlet flame longsword, and a line of fire appeared. It extended into a long scarlet flame snake in the air. It was several hundred meters long, and it rolled towards Jiwei. However, the flaming youth's strength was too weak. The flaming snake was directly torn apart by the silver sharp blade. The life-demanding blade struck out, instantly plunging the flaming youth into a moment of life and death. Right at the moment of imminent peril, a streak of starlight appeared and suddenly emerged, and actually enveloped the flaming youth. The stars around him formed a human-shaped starlight shield. Bang! When the silver sharp blade landed, a muffled sound rang out. It was actually unable to breach that starlight shield. The flaming youth was forced back several steps, but he was perfectly unscathed and not injured. When the crowd saw this scene, they were stunned one after another, and did not react to it for a long time. Jiwei's gaze trembled too. He did not expect that someone actually made a move at this time, blocking a fatal blow for the flaming youth. It's you! The next instant, Jiwei suddenly turned his head back, gaze glued onto a silver-haired youth. It was precisely Nie Tian. Nie Tian took a step forward, his figure moving, blocking between Jiwei and the flaming youth as he said coolly, "So what if it's me?" Just now, it was precisely him who used the heavenly star guardian to block the silver sharp blade for the flaming youth. Fortunately, he had the heavenly star guardian. Otherwise, it would be very hard to block Jiwei's fatal sword. The heavenly star guardian's defensive power was indeed strong enough, able to block the attack of a seventh firmament heavenly emperor sword master head-on. But this also expended the stellar power that Nie Tian was sizing up. With the stellar power that he currently awakened, he could at most use the heavenly star guardian 3 times. The flaming youth was a very hard-to-come-by sword Dao genius. Nie Tian seriously could not bear for him to die tragically like this. Furthermore, more importantly, the sword intent that this flaming youth released was precisely the Crimson Flame sword intent. Crimson Flame sword intent. This was the sword intent that the Crimson Flame Fiend Palace's palace lord, Lu Molu, used back then. Nie Tian had a Crimson Flame token in his hand. Returning to the Heaven Realm's divine realm this time, he still had an important matter to find the Crimson Flame Fiend Palace's people. He even guessed that Lu Molu might know his parentage. The flaming youth possessed the Crimson Flame sword intent. Nie Tian guessed that this youth was very likely related to the already destroyed Crimson Flame Fiend Palace. This was also another reason why he made a move to save people. "Brat, for you to be able to block my sword, very good. Looks like there will be a rather interesting massacre today." The corners of Jiwei's mouth curled up as he spoke with a playful expression. In his opinion, killing people was completely a kind of game. The killing game just now was too boring. His opponent was completely unable to withstand a single blow. Only with Nie Tian's appearance did this game become a little more interesting. At this time, the crowd's gazes shifted from the flaming youth to Nie Tian. Their gazes were all incomparably astonished. For Nie Tian to make a move to save people at this time was practically an act of courting death. Jiwei killed people without batting an eyelid. He didn't care about killing one more person. Jiwei, right? Nie Tian's expression was as calm as water, without the slightest ripple. He said indifferently, "Even solitary Silver City wasn't this arrogant back then. Looks like your family is getting more arrogant with each generation." And, hearing Nie Tian suddenly mention the name Solitary Silver City, Jiwei's eyes trembled violently. Because Solitary Silver City was his father. "Stinking brat, is my father's name also what you can call?" Jiwei roared angrily, all the killing intent in his body released, condensing into surging pressure, enveloping over toward Nie Tian. "Careful, mister. When Han Ling saw this scene, he could not help crying out, his complexion ashen as a sheet, bean-sized sweat beads seeping out of his forehead. He knew Nie Tian's identity, but the latter's strength was far inferior to Yin Jiwei's. How could he possibly be Yin Jiwei's match? Solitary Silver City is the Heaven Realm's divine realm's taboo? Even doesn't allow others to shout? Nie Tianling replied coldly, his body trembling, directly breaking through Yin Jiwei's aura pressure. With his current strength, even if a peak heavenly emperor martial artist wanted to suppress him with aura, it was also absolutely impossible. A mere 7th-level heavenly emperor wanted to use aura to suppress him, truly laughable. Chapter 1193. Silver Spirit Blade. When the crowd saw the silver long sword in Yin Jiwei's hand, it was sharp and extremely cold, and they couldn't help but exclaim. The silver spirit blade was Yin Jiwei's Yuanling sword. He didn't use it when he killed the gray-robed swordsman and attacked the fiery young man. Now that he was facing Nie Tian, he took out the silver spirit blade, which showed that he had started to take Nie Tian seriously as an opponent. Silver spirit blade. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he stared at the silver long sword in Yin Jiwei's hand. The sword body was surging with silver light, and the cold light was flickering, giving people an extremely heavy feeling of suffocation. It turns out that he has a Yuanling sword that is very suitable for the silver spirit sword essence. No wonder his silver spirit sword essence is more terrifying than Silver Lonely City. Nie Tian said in his heart, and at the same time, his body began to surge with a terrifying sword essence, but in the eyes of others, he didn't move at all. Nie Tian activated the Ghost Kill Darkstar again. His sword intent merged with his star power, making him move in a completely stealthy manner. Little brat, go to hell! Yin Jiwei's eyes were like poison, and the silver spirit blade trembled in the air. Suddenly, a sharp sword essence whistled out, like a silver-long snake, breaking through the air and attacking. The murderous aura filled the surrounding space, making people feel suffocated. Oh no! The crowd's heart trembled. The power of Yin Jiwei's silver spirit blade was inestimable. What was worse was that Nie Tian stood in the same place like a piece of wood, completely indifferent. Wasn't he waiting for death? Mr. Han Ling was also quite frightened and he screamed. However, just as the silver blade was about to reach Nie Tian, the heaven slash appeared in Nie Tian's hand, and he directly stabbed it out. Immediately, a boundless sword intent was released, and a black sword shadow appeared with a touch of blood, roaring as it flew out. Bang! At the moment when the two sword shadows collided, the void suddenly trembled, and a wave of air surged out in all directions. The people present couldn't bear this wave of air, and they all retreated. Crack, crack, crack! The limestone slabs on the ground were unable to withstand the impact of the surging sword intent, shattering into pieces. An enormous sword pit actually appeared. Kaboom! But right at this time, that black sword shadow erupted with a terrifying killing intent strangely. The silver blade immediately shattered. A feeling of death pounced wildly toward Yin Jiwei. Amen. Yin Jiwei's eyes trembled violently. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, but he reacted quickly. He stomped on the ground and retreated. Bang! However, he was still a step too late. A black blade struck him right in the shoulder, directly piercing through his shoulder. Immediately, blood gushed out. Seeing this scene, all the eyes opened wide, completely in disbelief. When the crowd saw this scene, all of their eyes opened wide, completely in disbelief. A 4th Firmament Heavenly Emperor Swordsman defeating a 7th Firmament Heavenly Emperor Swordsman with one sword, this was simply something impossible. Everyone looked at Tian. Tian. Nie Tian. Tian. Tian Tian. Nie. Only at this time did the people understand that Nie Tian making a move to save people was not seeking death, but that he possessed an extremely strange strength. When Nie Tian saw Yin Jiwei getting injured, he shook his head helplessly. Clearly, the power of this sword did not satisfy him. The sword just now, not only did he use the dark star ghostly carnage, but that hint of blood colored in that sword's shadow was precisely the taboo move, weeping blood soul cleaving. Under the fusion of two moves, furthermore, it was a sword that caught Yin Jiwei by surprise. It actually only injured Yin Jiwei and did not kill him. Nie Tian was somewhat disappointed. 7th level Heavenly Emperor martial artists are indeed still formidable. Nie Tian laughed bitterly in his heart, but his gaze swept across the sword Absolute Heaven Slash and saw a glaring crack. Sword Absolute Heaven Slash. A crack appeared on the sword body. The sword Absolute Heaven Slash was just a rank 7 spirit artifact. The power of that sword just now was too strong. The sword body was already unable to withstand the sword intense suppression. If Nie Tian used the sword Absolute Heaven Slash again, the sword body might directly shatter, hard to repair. Hence, following this, Nie Tian was very unable to use the sword Absolute Heaven Slash anymore. This is impossible. At this time, Yin Jiwei's figure stopped. Although the wound on his shoulder was not fatal, it made him cut an extremely wretched figure. Furthermore, his combat strength also fell considerably. He did not dare to believe that a 4th level Heavenly Emperor martial artist could actually erupt with such horrifying power. This virtually subverted his martial Dao understanding. "I'll kill you!" At virtually the same time, that flame youth suddenly roared angrily. The crimson flame long sword attacked, stabbing a sword towards Yin Jiwei. A crimson flame long snake appeared. Flames billowed in the air, courting death. Yin Jiwei just had nowhere to vent his bellyful of rage. Seeing the flame youth make a move, the corners of his mouth curled into a hint of a cold smile. The silver soul blade stirred a bit in the air. A silver-colored sharp blade slashed out. "Be careful!" Nie Tian's gaze turned dark and he cried out in shock. Meteor wings appeared on his back, his figure flying out like lightning. The silver soul blade brushed past Nie Tian's shoulder and flew past. He hugged the flame youth and barely avoided the fatal blow. The flame youth was young after all. He thought that he could make a move and kill Yin Jiwei after suffering a little injury. Fortunately, Nie Tian reacted in time. Otherwise, the flame youth would be dead for sure. Counting it, this was already the second time Nie Tian saved his life. Amen. Yin Jiwei's move missed. His gaze turned dark and he suddenly roared fiercely, "Stinking brat, I see how many people you can save." The moment his insolent voice faded, Yin Jiwei did not even look. Turning around, he slashed a sword towards the crowd. "Be careful!" Nie Tian's eyes suddenly dilated, and he actually saw this sword attack over towards Pu Fifan and Han Ling. He wanted to make a move to save them, but he was too far away and could not make it in time at all. "Junior apprentice brother, quickly go!" Han Ling abruptly came to his senses. His figure did not retreat but advanced, blocking in front of Pu Fifan. He was actually going to use his flesh and blood to block a fatal sword for Pu Fifan. "Senior apprentice brother!" Pu Fifan suddenly reacted and screamed, his small face pale as paper. The crowd was also stunned for an instant. They did not expect that Yin Jiwei was so ruthless, to actually directly attack others. The power of this sword of Yin Jiwei's was tremendous. As long as it landed, Han Ling and Pu Fifan would die tragically on the spot. "Who dares to touch my junior apprentice brother?" Just as Han Ling and Pu Fifan's life and death moment, a furious roar suddenly sounded out in the void. Following that, a streak of sword intent arrived from the sky, condensing into a sword shadow, and fell down from the sky. Bang! With a muffled sound, the two sword shadows collided together. Air billows spread out, directly blasting Han Ling and Pu Fifan flying out backward. But that sword shadow blocked most of the Silver Blade's attack. Han Ling and Pu Fifan only suffered light injuries and were not fatal. The next instant, a figure landed and asked nervously, "Junior apprentice brothers, are you guys alright?" "Eldest senior brother." Han Ling and Pu Fifan looked at the person in front of them and was stunned, calling out a name at the same time. The person who saved their lives in the nick of time was none other than precisely their eldest senior brother, Lu Haoyu. A trace of blood hung at the corners of the current Lu Haoyu's mouth. Clearly, it was the injuries caused by forcefully receiving Yin Jiwei's sword. He only had 6th-level Heavenly Emperor strength. To be able to forcefully withstand Yin Jiwei's sword was already very not easy. Chapter 1194. Who is this person? Lu Haoyu's sudden appearance caused the crowd to be slightly stunned. Their eyes were filled with surprise. Anyone who could withstand Yin Jiwei's sword was definitely not a nobody. Someone who recognized Lu Haoyu and exclaimed, "He seems to be Lord Emo Qianjuan's disciple." So, he's Lord Emo Qianjuan's disciple. It's no wonder why he's able to stand against Yin Jiwei. The crowd thought as a peculiar glint shone in their eyes. It was clear that they were waiting to see a good show. Lu Haoyu? Yin Jiwei glared at Lu Haoyu with killing intent in his eyes. First Senior, he's very powerful. You must be careful, Han Ling reminded Lu Haoyu. Yin Jiwei was definitely not an easy opponent to deal with. I know. Lu Haoyu nodded calmly as a smile crept up his lips. Even though he didn't say anything, his eyes showed that he had made up his mind. It was true that his actions in the past were wrong. However, from now on, he would shoulder the responsibility of a first senior. At the very least, he wouldn't allow anyone to harm his junior before him. Lu Haoyu, this matter has nothing to do with you. It's best if you don't interfere. Yin Jiwei's voice suddenly sounded. He was advising Lu Haoyu not to interfere in this matter. Lu Haoyu's eyes flickered and he said coldly, Yin Jiwei, from the moment you made a move to kill my junior brother, this matter is already related to me. The crowd was taken aback. They didn't expect Lu Haoyu to be so unyielding before Yin Jiwei. On the other hand, Yin Jiwei heaved a long sigh of relief, as if he had been frightened out of his wits. In truth, Yin Jiwei should be grateful to Lu Haoyu for saving him. Otherwise, there was a good chance that he would have killed Han Ling and Pu Fifan. When Yin Jiwei made his move earlier, he didn't think that Han Ling and Pu Fifan would be Emo Qianjuan's disciples. If Emo Qianjuan's disciple was killed in front of everyone, no matter how composed he was, there was no way he would let the matter rest. If that were to happen, Yin Jiwei's life would be a small matter. Perhaps, the entire Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion would be in deep trouble. No matter how arrogant Yin Jiwei was, he wouldn't dare to challenge the authority of a peak swordsman. Brother Lu, what happened just now was a moment of recklessness. I am willing to apologize. Then, something even more unexpected happened. Yin Jiwei actually spoke softly in front of everyone and even said that he could apologize. This. The crowd's eyes flickered. Apparently, they didn't expect such a strange turn of events. His temperament is vicious enough, yet he can endure it. As expected, Yin Jiwei is not an ordinary person. Nie Tian thought to himself as he looked at Yin Jiwei. Yin Jiwei was not blindly arrogant. In front of certain people, he would still restrain himself a little. Of course, he wasn't afraid of Lu Haoyu, but Emo Qianjun. Now that he knew that Lu Haoyu and the others were Emo Qianjuan's disciples, he didn't dare to kill them. If Nie Tian had guessed correctly, Yin Jiwei had already made up his mind to kill Lu Haoyu and the others when the Sword Dao competition began. Brat, count yourself lucky this time. Yin Jiwei threw a cold glance at Nie Tian, threw a threatening sentence, and directly turned to leave. The fiery young man actually calmed down this time. He stood beside Nie Tian, motionless, but his eyes were filled with terrible anger. Lu Haoyu didn't stop Yin Jiwei from leaving. With his strength, he couldn't stop him. It was already good enough that he could save Han Ling and Pu Fifan. Nie Tian looked at Yin Jiwei's arrogant figure and couldn't help but shake his head slightly. The feeling of being threatened was indeed not a good one. At this time, the crowd also slowly dispersed and went to discuss the Sword Dao competition. Lu Haoyu, have you thought it through? Nie Tian walked up and smiled lightly. Thank you, Your Excellency. Lu Haoyu nodded slightly, then looked at Han Ling and Pu Fifan and said sincerely, My two junior brothers, I apologize for the way I handled things in the past. Big Senior, there's no need to stand on ceremony. We're all brothers, so there's no need to stand on ceremony. Han Ling smiled faintly. Han Ling, Yin Jiwei is too powerful. I'm afraid that the matter between you and Miss Qin Yu. Lu Haoyu suddenly thought of something and said worriedly. Big Senior, I'll deal with this matter personally. Han Ling nodded deeply. Yin Jiwei is a ruthless and bloodthirsty person. I won't allow Qin Yu to marry him. His voice wasn't loud, but it was filled with determination. If Yin Jiwei was an upright person, Han Ling might have given in. However, Yin Jiwei was a ruthless person, and Han Ling couldn't bear to see his beloved woman jump into a pit of fire. In the eyes of the Qin clan, Qin Yu was just an object that they could make use of. The reason why they wanted her to marry Yin Jiwei was because they wanted to use the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion to raise the prestige of the Sea of Swords. Seeing Han Ling's reaction, Nie Tian couldn't help but smile. I really want to see what kind of woman Qin Yu is for Han Ling to be so infatuated with her. At this moment, the fiery young man silently walked up to the headless corpse and carried it in his arms. Without saying a word, he prepared to leave. Little brother, please wait a moment. Seeing that the other party was about to leave, Nie Tian hurriedly called out. Thank you for saving my life. I won't forget it. If there's a chance in the future, I'll definitely repay it, the fiery young man said. His figure didn't stop and continued to leave. Expo. At this moment, a gray-robed figure appeared in the air and landed beside the fiery young man. When he saw the corpse in the latter's arms, his expression immediately changed, and he bellowed furiously. Who did it? The furious bellow was like a clap of thunder. A violent aura burst forth, and the surrounding ground was forcefully torn apart. When Nie Tian saw the newcomer, his gaze involuntarily narrowed. This person had a burly figure, and the muscles all over his body seemed to be bursting. He was as strong as a lion, and he actually had the strength of an 8th-level heavenly emperor. If this person had come a moment earlier, that gray-robed swordsman definitely wouldn't have died. It's you. The gray-robed person was stunned for several seconds, then suddenly lifted his head. A pair of murderous pupils actually stared at Nie Tian. Nie Tian seemed to want to stop the fiery young man at this time. Hence, he was misunderstood by the gray-robed person. Pay for my second brother's life. The gray-robed person immediately flew into a violent rage. A wild and tyrannical voice sounded out. Boundless essence energy surged wildly. An enormous lion directly appeared behind him. It was actually his Titan True Body. When an 8th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist's Titan True Body appeared, the surrounding space was immediately compressed until it taut. The ground cracked open inch by inch. A violent aura surged out. The crowd retreated 1,000 meters away one after another. Nie Tian's brows furrowed. He did not expect that this person was so impulsive, directly using the Titan True Body. Fifth uncle. Right at this time, that fiery youth's figure moved, blocking in front of Nie Tian, and said, He didn't kill second uncle. It was someone else. He's my savior. If not for him, I'd also be killed by that person. Chapter 1195. Seeing that the aura of the gray-robed man had dissipated, Nie Tian heaved a sigh of relief and said, That person has already left. The gray-robed man glared at Nie Tian and asked, You know that man? His eyes were burning with fury. His name is Yin Jiwei, the young master of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, Nie Tian said. Yin Jiwei was Yin Guqing's son, so there was nothing wrong with calling him the young master. That bastard! The gray-robed man roared through gritted teeth. I don't care who he is. Since he killed my second brother, I'll make him pay with his blood. Seeing the gray-robed man's reaction, Nye Tian narrowed his eyes. It seemed like the gray-robed man didn't know what kind of organization the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was. Fifth uncle, let's go. The fiery young man nodded to Nye Tian and prepared to leave. The gray-robed man nodded. He didn't want to stay any longer, so he turned around and left. Please wait a moment. I have something to ask the two of you. Nye Tian took another step forward. He still didn't know the identity of the fiery young man, so how could he let him leave just like that? What do you want? The gray-robed man asked Nye Tian. If not for the fact that Nye Tian was the fiery young man's benefactor, he wouldn't have wasted his time. My name is Nye Tian. May I know how I should address the two of you? Nye Tian walked up to the two and introduced himself sincerely. My name is Kong Shibua, and he's my fifth uncle, Chun Feng. The fiery young man hesitated for a moment before replying. He didn't want to talk to others, but Nye Tian had saved his life twice, so he couldn't turn him down. Kong Shibua, Chun Feng, Nye Tian said as he glanced at the fiery young man and the gray-robed man. Chen Feng's face was dark, and it was clear that he was getting impatient. He said coldly, "What do you have to say? Just say it." Chun Feng might look like a burly man, but he was actually a meticulous person. He could tell that Nye Tian had something to ask him. Since that's the case, I won't beat around the bush. Nye Tian nodded slightly. His gaze calmed down as he transmitted his voice to the two of them. I want to know, are the two of you from the Scarlet Flame Demon Palace? Of course, Nye Tian couldn't reveal the information about the Scarlet Flame Devil Palace in front of so many people. How did you know? Kong Shibua's face changed, and he screamed, but he reacted quickly and swallowed the rest of his words. No. Chen Feng's face stiffened. Then, he replied in a cold tone. Nye Tian's eyes flickered slightly, capturing the two people's reactions perfectly. He immediately confirmed that these two people were from the Crimson Flame Devil Palace. However, Chun Feng clearly did not want to reveal his identity. Thus, he simply denied it. The Crimson Flame Demon Palace was destroyed more than 100 years ago. I didn't expect there to be people still alive. Perhaps Weimo too didn't die and just disappeared temporarily. Nye Tian thought to himself. As long as he could find the demonic road diagram, he might be able to investigate his past. Sir, are you all right? Chun Feng cast a peculiar glance at Nye Tian. Next, he pulled Kong Shibua up and left. Wait. When Nye Tian saw that they were about to leave again, he called out again. Then, a crimson token appeared in his hand. It was the Crimson Flame token of the Crimson Flame Demon Palace. It flashed in front of Chun Feng and Kong Shibua and disappeared. He said, I want to use this token to meet the palace master of the demonic road diagram. Why do you have? Chun Feng saw the token flash and was very sure that it was the Crimson Flame Demon Palace's Crimson Flame token. He was astonished and almost cried out. It seems that you are indeed from the Crimson Flame Demon Palace. Nye Tian smiled faintly and transmitted his voice. Chen Feng's eyes darkened, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He said coldly, What do you want? Don't be nervous, I'm not an enemy. I just want to find the palace master of the demonic road diagram and ask him about some things. Nye Tian nodded slightly. Although he and the Crimson Flame Demon Palace were incompatible like fire and water more than 100 years ago, he had let go of everything now. Thinking back, the Crimson Flame Demon Palace didn't do anything bad back then. They just inexplicably invaded the day-night celestial realm, which was why they had a conflict with Nye Tian. The palace master won't see you. Even if you have the Crimson Flame token, it's useless. Chun Feng said cold. Then, without delay, he pulled Kong Shibua and left. Nye Tian didn't stop him. If the other party didn't want to say, he couldn't force him. Moreover, he already knew an important piece of information. The demonic road diagram was still alive. Chun Feng and Kong Shibo would probably participate in the sword principle competition. There would be opportunities to meet in the future, so Nie Tian wasn't in a hurry. Since Chun Feng already knew that Yin Jiwei killed his second brother, of course he wouldn't let the latter go. "Mister, are these two people from the Crimson Flame Demon Palace?" At this time, Han Ling walked up and asked nervously in a low voice. Of course he knew about the Crimson Flame token. He was the one who handed the token to Nie Tian. Yes. Nie Tian nodded and didn't say much. No matter what, he had to find out his background. He faintly felt that his death back then might have something to do with his background. At this time, Lu Haoyu walked over and asked, "Han Ling, do you want to participate in the sword principle competition?" Yes. Han Ling nodded and said, "Since we're already in Tianhuang City, we must participate in the sword principle competition even if there's danger." For all swordsmen, the sword principle competition didn't just mean danger, it also meant opportunity. As long as they could enter the top 100, they could enter the ancient sword tomb. This was a temptation that no swordsman could resist. Therefore, even with the threat of a swordsman like Yin Jiwei, the enthusiasm of all the swordsmen to sign up didn't decrease. "Senior brother, I want to participate too." Pu Fifan raised his head and said with a determined look. "Junior brother, the sword principle competition isn't child's play. You're still young, so it's better if you don't participate," Han Ling said with a frown. The sword principle competition was a gamble between swordsmen. Pu Fifan was too young and too weak. Han Ling couldn't even protect himself, so how could he protect him? "Junior brother, your talent in sword principle is the best among all the brothers. You don't need to participate in this sword principle competition," Lu Haoyu also said in a deep voice. With Pu Fifan's talent, even if he didn't enter the ancient sword tomb, as long as he continued to grow, he would have the chance to become a peak swordsman like Mo Qianjun in the future. "I must participate." Pu Fifan was very persistent and had a determined look on his face. Lu Haoyu and Han Ling looked at each other helplessly. Let him participate. At this time, Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "I'll protect his safety." "Mister, I'm afraid that's not appropriate, right?" Han Ling was slightly stunned. He believed in Nie Tian's strength, but this would undoubtedly add more danger to the sword principle competition. "Don't worry." Nie Tian nodded and smiled, but in his heart, he thought, it's safer for Pu Fifan to participate in the sword principle competition. If he's left alone in Tianhuang City, it'll be the most dangerous. Yin Jiwei must have already known about Pu Fifan's extraordinary talent and would never allow such a genius to continue living. Therefore, Nie Tian could only be at ease with Pu Fifan by his side. "If that's the case, let's go and sign up." Han Ling didn't know what Nie Tian was thinking, but he believed in the latter's decision. Nie Tian and the others arrived at the place where the sword principle competition would sign up. They immediately saw a man and a woman walking over. They were actually acquaintances, Xiao Yun and Shangguan Yufei. Chapter 1196. Brother Nie. Xiao Yun greeted enthusiastically when he saw Nie Tian and the others, but the black-clad old man behind him locked his gaze on Nie Tian. His eyes flickered as though he had discovered something. "It's Shangguan Feiyu." Nie Tian's eyes flickered when he saw the black-clad old man, but he immediately regained his composure. However, he was rather surprised. He was very familiar with the black-clad old man in front of him. His name was Shangguan Feiyu, the younger brother of the Abyss Master of the Abyss of Still Water, Shangguan Feihong. In Nie Tian's previous life, he was extremely famous for his sword principle, which attracted countless challengers. Shangguan Feiyu was one of the many challengers, but he lost miserably to Nie Tian. Nie Tian still remembered that Shangguan Feiyu's sword intent of still water was very terrifying. If not for his sword principle realm being much higher than his opponent, the outcome of that battle would be unknown. After that battle, Shangguan Feiyu was completely convinced by Nie Tian and even had the urge to take him as his master. However, Nie Tian was a swordsman of the same generation as him. In the end, they only talked about swords as friends and could be considered as good friends in the sword principle. Nie Tian did not expect to meet Shangguan Feiyu on such an occasion. Shangguan Feiyu is only over 200 years old. Why does he look so old? Nie Tian could not help but frown when he saw Shangguan Feiyu's aged appearance. He was puzzled. Shangguan Feiyu was already at the 8th level of the Heavenly Emperor realm. To him, 200 years old was at most the prime of his life. He should not look so old. Even though Long Outyen was oppressed by the Een Corpse curse seal and looked slightly old, he looked much younger after the Een Corpse curse seal was absorbed by the 8 desolate ghost bone. What's wrong with Shangguan Feiyu? Why does he look old? Nie Tian was puzzled, but he did not show it. Xiao Yun, is this young master your friend? Shangguan Feiyu sensed a very familiar sword-intent aura from Nie Tian, but he was not sure, so he asked Xiao Yun with a faint smile. Second uncle, his name is Nie Tian. He's a close friend of mine. Xiao Yun stood beside Nie Tian and said excitedly, as if they were very familiar with each other. Nie Tian. Upon hearing this name, Shangguan Feiyu could not help but frown. He thought to himself, this silver-haired guy is also called Nie Tian, and he has a sword essence aura that is very similar to Mr. Nie's. Could he be related to Mr. Nie? Thinking of this, Shangguan Feiyu looked up and down at Nie Tian. He laughed and said, Young Master Nie, you are so young, but you have such strength. Your teacher must be a great swordsman. Could you introduce him to I? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, but he immediately understood that Shangguan Feiyu must have regarded him as another Nie Tian's disciple or descendant. My teacher is not willing to associate with outsiders. Please forgive him. Since this was the case, Nie Tian made the best of it. He bowed slightly and said. Upon hearing Nie Tian's words, Shangguan Feiyu's eyes suddenly trembled. He exclaimed in his heart, Is Mr. Nie really still alive? Second uncle, are you okay? Xiao Yun was stunned when he saw Shangguan Feiyu's reaction. He asked curiously. I'm fine. Shangguan Feiyu reacted and shook his head slightly. His eyes were fixed on Nie Tian, and he looked extremely strange. Second uncle, isn't his hair a little strange? Do you have to stare at him like that? Shangguan Yufei pouted and said angrily. She then introduced herself. Han Ling and the others also introduced themselves. Han Ling, Miss Shangguan and Mr. Xiao are from the Still Water Abyss? Lu Haoyu was surprised. He did not expect to meet a swordsman from the Still Water Abyss. The swordsman from the Still Water Abyss has not appeared for a long time. This time, the ancient sword tomb is open, so we are also here to join in the fun. Shangguan Feiyu laughed dryly and said lightly. Lu Haoyu was surprised and could not react for a long time. Next, Nie Tian and the others signed up one by one and received a spiritual talisman. This spiritual talisman was not only the basis for a swordsman to participate in the sword principle competition, but it was also a life-saving item for a swordsman. As long as the spiritual talisman was crushed, it meant that one had automatically given up on the sword principle competition. In principle, no one would kill one. However, this was only in principle. If one encountered a homicidal maniac like Yin Jiwei, he would kill one regardless of whether the spiritual talisman was broken or not. This is a sensory spiritual talisman. It should correspond to a sensory spiritual formation. All swordsmen will appear on the sensory spiritual formation after entering the forbidden zone of infinite region. Nie Tian looked at the spiritual talisman in his hand and said lightly in his heart, If a swordsman entered the forbidden zone of infinite region with the spiritual talisman, he would know the whereabouts of all swordsmen at any time. At the thought of his whereabouts being exposed to others, Nie Tian had an uneasy feeling. Mr. Nie, the sword principle competition will begin in half a month. I hope that you can team up with Yufei and Xiao Yun to pass the competition. Shangguan Feiyu walked over and deliberately got close to Nie Tian. He seemed to want to confirm the sword essence aura of the latter. He stared at Nie Tian with a cunning look on his face. Shangguan Feiyu was a swordsman of the older generation. Of course, he would not participate in the sword principle competition. With his age and sword principle strength, even if he could enter the sword tomb, it would be difficult for him to inherit the sword principle inheritance. If he competed with young swordsmen for a place in the sword principle competition, he would only be a joke. The sword principle competition was so cruel that the participating swordsmen would definitely team up. The most obvious way was to team up according to their sections. Lu Haoyu and Han Ling were slightly stunned. They did not expect Shangguan Feiyu to take the initiative to team up. Lu Haoyu and Nie Tian's strength was not bad, but Han Ling and Pu Fifan were too weak. Was he not afraid that they would be a burden if they teamed up with these 4 people? Second uncle. Shangguan Yufei also looked unhappy. Her arrogant eyes swept across Han Ling and Pu Fifan. Han Ling was fine, at least he could protect himself. However, Pu Fifan was just a child. The sword principle competition was a gamble of life and death. Who would have the mood to take care of a child? Second uncle's suggestion is great. Brother Nie, let's team up. Xiao Yun was very willing and looked very excited. Since Mr. Shangguan is so kind, how can I refuse? Nie Tian smiled faintly. Of course, he knew what Shangguan Feiyu was thinking. Shangguan Feiyu smiled faintly and stared at Nie Tian with his pair of cunning eyes. He thought to himself, since you are related to Mr. Nie, how can you be weak? If Yufei and Xiao Yun can team up with you, we will have full confidence in this sword principle competition. At that moment, Shangguan Feiyu had already determined that the silver-haired swordsman in front of him was definitely related to the god of war, Nie Tian. Although he was not sure what the specific relationship was, he believed that with the god of war, Nie Tian's strength, the silver-haired swordsman's strength must be extremely terrifying. The sword principle competition would only begin in half a month. Nie Tian and the others were prepared to leave first. Teacher, it's this person. Just as they were about to leave, a deep and angry roar was heard. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He felt that the voice was somewhat familiar. He turned around and saw that it was indeed a familiar person, Xue Shuangqing. Xue Shuangqing stared at Nie Tian calmly. Beside him stood the woman who had attempted to have an affair with him. Chapter 1197. Here comes another smelly rat. Nie Tian's gaze swept across Xue Shuangqing with a helpless look. Then, he looked at that green-clothed old man. Very clearly, the green-clothed old man was the main character looking for trouble this time. What's the matter? Nie Tian looked at Xue Shuangqing and asked coldly. Previously, he did not kill Xue Shuangqing on account of Hidden Sword Valley's Valley Master Ling Zhan. He did not expect that the other party still dared to take the initiative to provoke. Xue Shuangqing did not answer Nie Tian's question but said to the green-clothed old man beside him, Teacher, it's this brat who insulted Hidden Sword Valley's swordsman and insulted Valley Master. Nie Tian's gaze turned intent slightly. Xue Shuangqing really did not blush at all when lying, spewing shit in front of Nie Tian. Brat, your guts are really not small. Could it be that my Hidden Sword Valley is really so easy to provoke? The green-clothed old man spoke coldly, his eyes surging with deep anger. What do you want? Nie Tian swept his divine sense across the green-clothed old man and said coolly. The green-clothed old man's strength was not weak. He was actually a 7th-level heavenly emperor. Furthermore, he had the realm of middle-rank sword profound meaning. Although this strength was very strong, placed on a 300 to 400 years old man, it was also just sloppy and ordinary. One had to know, Yin Jiwei was also a 7th-level heavenly emperor, and his sword Dao realm had already reached high-rank sword profound meaning. It was no exaggeration to say that Yin Ji-wei could insta-kill the green-clothed old man in front of him with one sword. Although the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion and Hidden Sword Valley were both part of the 9 great sword sects, their strength was quite different. Among the 9 great sword sects, they could basically be divided into 3 levels: upper 3 sects, middle 3 sects, and lower 3 sections. Heaven Desolate Hall, Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, Stillwater Abyss were the upper 3 sects, while Hidden Sword Valley, Sword Viewing Sea, and so on were the lower 3 sections. If Nie Tian did not remember wrongly, Hidden Sword Valley was a bottom-tier existence among the 9 great sword sects. Nie Tian did not explain anything to the green-clothed old man because he knew that even if he explained, the other party would not believe it either. "Brat, you're really arrogant. How dare you speak in such a manner in front of I?" The cyan-clothed old man smiled coldly, and the sword intent around him began to surge, as if it would turn into a terrible killing intent in the next moment. "Is your status very high?" Nie Tianling sneered, not giving him any face at all. He said, "You're already so old, and you've only just broken through to the intermediate sword ultimacy. To think that you still dare to come out and embarrass yourself. If I were you, I would have killed myself long ago." Since the other party had taken the initiative to provoke him, there was no need for Nie Tian to show mercy. "Brat, you're courting death." The azure-robed old man was instantly enraged. The aura around his body swelled, and a terrifying golden lightning sword intent radiated from his body. Lightning bolts hundreds of meters long were released, surging in the air as if they were going to tear space apart. At this moment, Xiao Yun was about to attack, but he was stopped by Shangguan Feiyu. Shangguan Feiyu looked at Nie Tian expectantly. He really wanted to see the strength of the Battle Immortal's disciple. Lightning Attribute Sword Intent. When Nie Tian saw the surging sword intent around the azure-robed old man, he could not help but smile in surprise. Originally, he was still thinking about how to defeat the azure-robed old man with one sword strike. Now, it seemed that he would not need to use the Dark Star Ghost Kill. Nie Tian's Thunderbolt Divine Pattern, which was integrated into the sword intent, had an absolute suppression on all lightning attribute powers, especially the lightning attribute sword intent. Before his Thunderbolt sword intent, the opponent would not even be able to raise their head. "Brat, how dare you offend me? You're dead meat." Xue Shuangqing's figure retreated 1,000 meters away. He stared at Nie Tian with a pair of vicious eyes as he spoke in a cold voice. He believed that if his teacher personally attacked, he would definitely be able to kill Nie Tian with one sword strike. The others also retreated, not daring to get close. Shangguan Feiyu's eyes were tense. Although he was confident in Nie Tian, he was also prepared to attack if there were any accident. "Brat, go to hell." The cyan-robed old man let out a furious roar as sword intent madly surged out of his body and pounced towards Nie Tian like raging waves. At the same time, a huge golden lightning sword appeared, flickering with lightning power as it slashed towards Nie Tian. "It's over. The silver-haired brat is dead meat." When the crowd saw this, their hearts jumped to their throat. They all believed that Nie Tian was dead meat. Nie Tian stood where he was. His body moved, and a thunderbolt sea appeared behind him. He did not even use his sword. Instead, he punched out. The thunderbolt sea suddenly roared and tumbled. A thunderbolt dragon appeared and tumbled in the air. A terrifying dragon aura surged in the space. The thunderbolt dragon pounced ferociously. The dragon's body was flowing with golden dragon energy. At the same time, a terrifying sword intent surged. Kaboom! In midair, the golden thunder giant sword collided with the thunderbolt dragon. After a crisp sound, the golden thunder giant sword shattered. Could not resist the thunderbolt dragon at all. What a horrifying power suppression! When Shangguan Feiyu saw this scene, his gaze suddenly trembled. He could naturally tell that Nie Tian's power of thunder had an absolute suppression on the azure-robed old man's golden thunder sword intent. At the same time, that surging dragon energy was also incomparably terrifying. Arg! The next instant a shrill scream sounded out. The azure-robed old man directly flew out backward, smashing heavily onto the ground. The limestone floor shattered inch by inch. His entire person became a bloody mess. The scene that suddenly happened made the entire place fall into a deathly silence. Countless pairs of eyes looked at Nie Tian with dumbfounded faces, completely unable to believe the scene before their eyes. A 7th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist was sent flying by a 4th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist with one punch. How was this possible? Shangguan Yufei, Xiao Yun, and the rest were stunned, their faces blank. Xiao Yun reckoned that his still-water sword intent could also receive the azure-robed old man's sword. But wanting to seriously injure the azure-robed old man, that was absolutely impossible. Only at this time did Shangguan Yufei know that this silver-haired youth's strength was actually strange and horrifying like this. While Lu Haoyu was even more astonished to the extreme. Thinking about how he was once defeated by Nie Tian with one sword, it turned out that it was not a coincidence. Teacher! After a long time, Xue Shuangqing finally reacted. With a wail, he pounced over toward the azure-robed old man. The azure-robed old man struggled to stand up, dripping with blood all over his body. His eyes, when looking at Nie Tian, carried thick apprehension as he said in a trembling voice, How could this be? He could not understand that he, an exalted 7th-level Heavenly Emperor's strength, would actually lose to a 4th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist. Furthermore, he was defeated so miserably, virtually without the slightest strength to retaliate. You guys leave. Consider it giving Ling Zhan face this time, Nie Tian laughed and said coldly. Looking on the account of a tiny bit of face between him and the concealed Sword Valley's Valley Master, Ling Zhan, Nie Tian did not kill the azure-robed old man. If he fully released the dragon chi within his body just now, one punch would be sufficient to insta-kill the azure-robed old man. You! The azure-robed old man's gaze darkened. Before he finished a sentence, he directly vomited a mouthful of fresh blood. I've never insulted the concealed Sword Valley's swordsman, let alone insulted Valley Master Ling Zhan. I'll have to trouble you to ask clearly next time before finding trouble with me. This disciple of yours is lusting after women and doesn't think about improving himself. Discipline him properly. Nie Tian gave the azure-robed old man a glance, thought for a while, and still said, Xue Shuangqing, what's going on here? The azure-robed old man roared angrily, a pair of pupils staring at Xue Shuangqing, practically spewing fire. Chapter 1198. Teacher, I. Xue Shuangqing's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. His eyes flickered intensely, and his body was drenched in cold sweat. Let's go. Nie Tian was not in the mood to pay attention to this pair of master and disciple. He said nonchalantly and then bade farewell to Shangguan Feiyu and the rest before leaving. The crowd looked in the direction where Nie Tian disappeared with shocked expressions and could not speak for a long time. Second uncle, how can his strength be so terrifying? Shangguan Yufei looked at the silver-haired back view and said with a surprised face. Shangguan Feiyu laughed bitterly and seemed to have thought of something. He shook his head and said, because he has a terrifying person behind him. Following that, Shangguan Feiyu and the rest also left, and the crowd quickly dispersed. Scoundrel, let's go! The old man in green roared angrily and turned to leave. It was unknown how he would deal with Xue Shuangqing. After Nie Tian and the rest left, they found a remote inn and prepared to spend the next half a month in the inn. Apart from Nie Tian, Lu Haoyu, Han Ling, and Pu Fifan, the other swordsmen from the Limitless Mountain did not participate in the sword doctrine competition. Lu Haoyu told them to go back and inform Mo Qianjun of the situation here. Perhaps after Mo Qianjun knew, he might come personally. After all, Han Ling and Qin Yang had a life-and-death duel. Han Ling, let me take a look at your spirit talismans. Nie Tian entered the room and asked Han Ling and the rest to hand the spirit talismans to him. Nie Tian held 4 spirit talismans in his hand and probed them with his divine senses. He carefully compared and felt the 4 spirit talismans. After confirming that there was no difference between the 4 spirit talismans, his face relaxed a lot. Then, he returned the spirit talismans to the 3. He was worried that someone had tampered with the spirit talismans and used them to track him. Now, all the spirit talismans were the same. There were countless of them in the entire Tianhuang city. Hence, there was no way to track him using the spirit talismans. Following that, the other 3 returned to their own rooms. There were still 4 months before the start of the sword doctrine competition. All the swordsmen participating in the competition would cultivate hard and strive to improve their strength. Half a month's time is sufficient for me to break through to the 5th level of Heavenly Emperor. In the room, Nie Tian murmured. He was currently a peak 4th level Heavenly Emperor, and there were still remnants of energy absorbed from the spiritual pool of heaven and earth in his body. Moreover, the sovereign dual meridians were also fusing more thoroughly. Half a month later, he was confident that his strength would rise to the 5th level Heavenly Emperor. Nie Tian sat cross-legged and entered a state of cultivation. Within the primal chaos original coffin, the 9 extreme chaos beast had already fully recovered. It was in peak condition. Its furry body was curled up as it slept soundly. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. In the room, Nie Tian was in a state of cultivation. Dense heaven and earth spiritual energy surged around him, causing the space around him to become restless. This was the sign of a breakthrough. Nie Tian's brows furrowed tightly. Waves of berserk spiritual energy impacted his 9 essence meridians, making his body tremble along with it. Nie Tian originally thought that half a month's time was sufficient to let him easily break through to the 5th level Heavenly Emperor. But he did not expect that after the dual meridians in his body fused, the demand for heaven and earth spiritual energy became even greater, making his breakthrough require even more heaven and earth spiritual energy, imperceptibly increasing the difficulty of breaking through. This way, each time Nie Tian broke through, his strength would increase substantially. Break for me! At this time, Nie Tian roared angrily. A wild aura around him finally broke through the shackles, gushing out wildly. He directly stood up, his gaze flickering with a sharp light, his entire person as sharp as a sword. 5th level Heavenly Emperor finally broke through. The corners of Nie Tian's mouth curled up into a hint of a smile. Wiping away the sweat beads on his forehead, he said with a faint smile. He finally broke through to the 5th level Heavenly Emperor. The 5th level Heavenly Emperor was a watershed in the Heavenly Emperor realm. Many people found it hard to break through. Nie Tian only used several months' time to go from the 4th level Heavenly Emperor to the 5th level Heavenly Emperor. Such a horrifying advancement speed was inconceivable. Quickly come and take a look. What's the 5th move of the Starry Sky ancient martial art? Nie Tian could not hide the agitation in his heart. Divine sense moved, directly entering the Starry River's boundary. The dazzling 4th level Celestial River, the power of stars awakened by half. Starlight flickered, exuberant with vitality. Amen. Nie Tian's heart stirred, wanting to flip to the next page of the Starry Sky ancient martial art. He actually discovered that the Starry Sky ancient martial art did not have any reaction at all, making him involuntarily frown. What's going on? Nie Tian had a puzzled look. Previously, each time his strength increased once, the Starry Sky ancient martial art would be able to flip to the next page, letting him learn the next move. But now it actually could not be opened. Nie Tian tried a few more times, but there was still no activity. So strange. Nie Tian had a depressed look, not knowing what was going on. Forget it. After trying for a long time to no avail, Nie Tian finally gave up. He felt that perhaps when his strength continued to improve, he would be able to open the starry sky ancient martial art. With a thought, Nie Tian prepared to leave the starry river. However, at that very moment, he suddenly discovered something strange. The divine patterns in his divine sense had become violent. Countless magical symbols joined together and gradually formed a huge magical symbol net. Although it was somewhat similar to the heaven-shrouding totem, it was formless and shadowless, which made it very strange. This is some kind of array. Nie Tian was stunned at first, then immediately reacted, carefully perceiving the aura of the holographic divine runes, his face revealing a happy smile. The power of this array is so strong, it can actually imprison the five senses and even the essence force of a martial artist. Nie Tian immediately sensed that the array formed by the holographic divine runes released a powerful imprisonment force that could imprison the five senses of a martial artist, and even had a certain suppression force on the Yuan meridian. Holographic imprisonment. The next moment, a voice suddenly sounded in Nie Tian's mind, making him stunned. Holographic imprisonment. Nie Tian was very excited. He had heard from the Sword Elder that when the holographic divine runes were cultivated to the extreme, it could perceive the world and contain everything, but he did not expect that the holographic divine runes could also create a terrible imprisonment. Although he had not used it yet, Nie Tian could perceive that the power of the holographic imprisonment was very terrifying. It seemed to be more terrifying than the suppression caused by the sky-shrouding totem. Imagine, if it was a battle of life and death, the other party's five senses and Yuan meridian were imprisoned, it would definitely be fatal. Very good. Nie Tian was very excited. With the holographic imprisonment, he had an extremely terrifying trump card. Now the only regret was that there was a crack on the sword extinction heaven slash, and he could no longer use it. There must be many ancient swords in the ancient sword tomb. If I find one that matches the attribute of the sword extinction heaven slash, I can ask Tiangong to refine it again. I will definitely be able to make the sword extinction heaven slash emperor light reappear. Nie Tian murmured. Sir. At this time, Han Ling's voice sounded outside the door. Nie Tian suddenly remembered that today was the day of the sword competition. At this time, Nie Tian suddenly sensed two familiar auras, causing his eyes to freeze, and he said in surprise, "It's them." Nie Tian smiled faintly, walked out of the room, and said to Han Ling, "We have guests." Guests? Han Ling was slightly stunned. He did not know what Nie Tian meant. Nie Tian had a strange smile on the corner of his mouth, but he did not say anything. Chapter 1199. It's them. Han Ling's eyes flickered when he saw Chen Feng and Kong Shibua. He knew that they were from the Crimson Flame Demonic Palace, but he didn't know why they were here. Young Master Nie, Chen Feng looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice. It was obvious that they were here for Nie Tian. Nie Tian smiled faintly in response, but in his heart, he felt strange. How did they find him? The inn that Nie Tian and the others were staying in was very remote. Very few people could find it. It was definitely not a coincidence that Chen Feng and the others were here. Young Master Nie, I have something to talk to you about, Chen Feng said directly. Okay, let's talk in the room. Nie Tian smiled and entered the room, indicating Han Ling and the others to guard outside. There were only Nie Tian and Chen Feng in the room. Palace Lord asked me to find you. Chen Feng sat down, but his eyes were fixed on Nie Tian. He seemed very strange. After meeting Nie Tian that day, Chen Feng had returned to the demonic Crimson Flames Palace and informed the Palace Lord of the demonic Crimson Flames Palace, Lu Moltu, that Nie Tian possessed a Scarlet Flame token. Due to that, Lu Moltu appeared very anxious. Thus, he asked Chen Feng to find Nie Tian. Nie Tian's location was what Lu Moltu had told Chen Feng. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He didn't show it on his face, but he was very excited in his heart. He had already guessed that it was very likely that his crimson flame token had exposed his whereabouts. Lu Moltu could sense his presence through the crimson flame token. Since it was Lu Moltu who had asked Chen Feng to come here, things were getting interesting. Did Lord Moltu agree to see me? Nie Tian asked with a smile. Lu Moltu most likely knew about Nie Tian's background, and the latter was eager to meet him. Chen Feng was stunned. He didn't expect Nie Tian to be so smart. He calmed down and said, "Palace Lord said that he wants to make a deal with you." A deal? Nie Tian was slightly taken aback. Then, he showed great interest and said, "Tell me about it." Chen Feng nodded and said, "Palace Master said that he hopes that you can protect the young master during the Sword Dao competition. Furthermore, you must help the young master obtain the Sword Dao inheritance after entering the ancient sword tomb. If you can do this, the Palace Lord will meet with you." Young master? Nie Tian was taken aback. Next, he turned to look outside the room and understood. The young Lord Chen Feng was referring to was Kong Shibua. It seemed like Kong Shibua's identity was not ordinary. Even the demonic Lu had to respectfully refer to him as young master. Yes. Chen Feng nodded solemnly, confirming that the young master he mentioned was Kong Shibua. He then asked directly, "Are you willing to make such a deal?" Nie Tian smiled strangely. He did not reply directly and instead suddenly asked, "Does Lord Lu Mo too know who I am?" It was not difficult for Nie Tian to protect Kong Shibua during the Sword Dao competition. However, it was not easy to ensure that Kong Shibua could obtain the Sword Dao inheritance in the ancient sword tomb. This was because the Sword Dao inheritance not only required strength, but also opportunity. It would not be good to forcefully fuse with a Sword Dao inheritance of an incompatible attribute. Nie Tian could not determine whether there was a Sword Dao inheritance suitable for Kong Shibua in the ancient sword tomb. The sect master said that your name is Nie Tian. He knows who you are, and he also knows why you want to see him. To Nie Tian's surprise, Chen Feng seemed to have anticipated Nie Tian's question, and thus answered calmly, "If you can help the young master obtain the legacy of Sword Dao, the sect master will tell you what you want to know." Nie Tian frowned slightly and his expression became strange. From what Chen Feng said, it seemed that the demonic Lu already knew his true identity. But how was this possible? The news of Nie Tian's death was known throughout the Heaven Realm, and the demonic Lu seemed to know that he was still alive and was very certain of it. Could it be that the demonic Lu really knows about my identity? The doubts in Nie Tian's heart intensified. He decided that no matter what, he had to see the demonic Lu. "All right, I agree to this deal. I hope that Lord Demonic Lu will not go back on his word," Nie Tian said in a deep and stern voice. Chen Feng nodded slightly and said, "Don't worry, the Palace Lord is not a despicable person who goes back on his word." After the two sides made the deal, Nie Tian stood up and walked out of the room, preparing to leave this place. Today was the day the Sword Dao competition would begin. It was likely that all the swordsmen had already gathered in the square. Nie Tian and the others did not delay and directly went to the square where they had signed up. At this time, the square was filled with a sea of people. There were tens of thousands of swordsmen gathered together. There are so many people participating in the Sword Dao competition. Han Ling's eyes darkened when he saw the scene before him. It seemed that the sword principal battle was more intense than he had expected. Tens of thousands of cultivators had entered, but only 100 remained. This elimination rate was really terrifying. So many swordsmen, can a small forbidden realm of infinite wasteland hold them all? Nie Tian smiled bitterly. He had never been to the forbidden realm of infinite wasteland, and even suspected that the forbidden realm was not big enough to hold so many swordsmen. There was no doubt that the competition in the Sword Dao this time would definitely be an extremely horrifying and fierce battle between dragons and tigers. There are at least 30 to 40,000 swordsmen here. Are they all going to enter the forbidden realm of infinite wasteland together? Lu Haoyu frowned and said with a puzzled expression. Of course not, just look at the sky and you will know. At this time, an excited voice sounded. Then, 3 figures appeared. It was Xiao Yun and the others. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He had just been looking for Xiao Yun and the others. He did not expect them to appear so quickly. It's the iron-backed dragon eagle. Everyone raised their heads to look at the sky. More than 10 huge figures appeared, covering the sky and darkening the entire space. So they are using the iron-backed dragon eagle to transport the swordsman to the forbidden realm of infinite wasteland. Nie Tian smiled faintly. More than 10 iron-backed dragon eagles were enough to transport tens of thousands of swordsmen. Everyone, please board the iron-backed dragon eagle. At this time, a mighty voice resounded in the square. It contained an extremely powerful force, and everyone could hear it clearly. I'll go first. As the mighty voice fell, the entire square boiled. Countless people fought to be the first to shout and soared into the sky, flying onto the iron-backed dragon eagle. Countless sword essences surged in mid-air, and the entire sky was filled with sword essences. They clashed with each other and exploded with terrifying air wave. Are you in such a hurry to die? Xiao Yun chuckled when he saw the scene. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. He was not in a hurry. The first to enter the forbidden realm of infinite wasteland meant that they would be the first to enter the danger zone. These people risked their lives to go to a dangerous place, which made people speechless. In just a moment, all the swordsmen in the square had basically boarded the iron-backed dragon eagle, leaving only a few dozen swordsmen who were not in a hurry. Let's go up too. With a faint smile, Nie Tian soared into the sky and released a fierce sword aura, which was overbearing and sharp. The others followed Nie Tian and boarded the iron-backed dragon eagle almost at the same time. Shangguan Feiyu, Chen Feng, and the others looked at the iron-backed dragon eagle above their heads. Their eyes flickered with anticipation. At the same time, in the Infinite Wasteland Hall in the center of Infinite Wasteland City, a few figures stood in the hall and stared at the sensing spiritual formation in the center of the hall. In the spiritual formation, countless light spots flickered and floated in mid-air. Chapter 1200. The sensory spiritual array at the center of the Heaven Wasteland Great Hall surged with runes, and the power of the array flowed endlessly. This was a very mysterious sensory spiritual array that could sense the aura of every talisman. Every light dot represented a swordsman participating in the sword principle competition. Senior brother is indeed powerful. A small sword principle competition has attracted so many swordsmen. Beside the spiritual array, a skinny figure appeared. He spoke coldly with a strange smile on his face. The person who spoke was a gray-robed swordsman who looked to be in his 40s or 50s. He was as skinny as a mummy and his aura was restrained. His eyes were as empty as the abyss, but they gave off an extremely terrifying suffocating pressure, as if one look at him would sink into the abyss. This person was none other than one of the 5 great swordsmen of the Heaven Domain, Duguanai. Duguanai was a swordsman from the Heaven Wasteland Hall, and was also the Deputy Hall Master of the Heaven Wasteland Hall. It was not strange for him to appear here. Opposite Duguanai stood a middle-aged man with a long beard. He was dressed in white and looked elegant and handsome, giving off a gentlemanly feeling. However, his eyes flickered with a cold light, as if there was a deep secret hidden in them. He was Duguani's senior brother, the Hall Master of the Heaven Wasteland Hall, Song Shanshu. These swordsmen are all here for the ancient sword tomb. Otherwise, they would not participate in the sword principle competition. Song Shanshua said indifferently. His expression was calm and there was not the slightest ripple in his eyes. Yes. Duguanai let out a strange laugh. He looked at the light dots in the sensory spiritual array and said, "Everyone comes for benefits. In order to get what they want, they do not hesitate to gamble with their lives. I wonder how many of these light dots will flicker after the sword principle competition. Duguni's eyes were as calm as water, as if the light dots were not people, but ants. Hall Master, all the swordsmen have arrived above the forbidden region of Heaven Wasteland. Should we let them in now? At this time, a gray-robed elder spoke respectfully. From his attire, he should be a spiritual array master. Okay, let them in. Song Shanshua nodded slightly, a strange smile flashing across his lips. Go in, all of you go in. The show is about to begin. Dugu and I chuckled with excitement in his eyes. At the same time, in a forbidden zone of the desolate mountain range, more than a dozen steel-backed dragon eagles floated in the air. Tens of thousands of swordsmen stood on them, looking down at the forbidden zone with excitement and uneasiness. What a powerful sword formation! Nye Tian stood on the back of a steel-backed dragon eagle. His eyes trembled involuntarily when he sensed the vast power of the formation coming from below. He did not expect the forbidden region of infinite wasteland to be guarded by a huge sword formation. This isn't an ancient forbidden spell. It seems to have existed for only 100 years. The power of this spell is very strong. Nye Tian thought to himself, after which, he looked at the talisman in his hand. The aura within the talisman was similar to the power of the formation. It contained the power of the sword formation. You can enter the forbidden zone now. The talismans in your hands can temporarily open the forbidden zone's protective sword array. At this moment, a swordsman from the desolate palace appeared and said coldly, after entering the forbidden zone, if the talisman in your hand breaks, you will be eliminated. Someone in the forbidden zone will take you away. Remember, there will only be 100 swordsmen left in the forbidden zone. The man emphasized the last sentence as if to remind everyone to grab the talismans from others and break them. Alright, I'll go in first. As soon as the man finished his sentence, someone could not wait any longer and directly leaped down from the steel-backed dragon eagle. When he was close to the sword formation, the talisman in his hand released the power of the formation, which tore a crack in the sword formation. The figure entered the crack and instantly disappeared. Upon seeing this, the other swordsmen also leaped down from the steel-backed dragon eagles. Countless figures tore a crack in the sword formation, causing the entire sword formation to shake violently. Nye Tian was not in a hurry as he watched from the side. When most of the swordsmen had left, he signaled the others to prepare to enter the forbidden zone. Nye Tian's figure directly leaped out and swooped down. With a thought, the talisman released the power of the formation, and a crack appeared in the sword formation, allowing his figure to enter. So this talisman is the key to enter the forbidden zone of desolate heaven. Nye Tian landed on a boulder and restrained his aura to the extreme as he kept the talisman in his hand. Then, Han Ling and the others also descended from the sky and appeared at a place not far from Nye Tian. Is everyone okay? Nye Tian's gaze swept across and made sure that everyone was there, but a strange look flashed across his eyes. Nye Tian's group was all there. He looked at everyone, planning something in his heart. There were a total of 7 people in this group. Nye Tian, Lu Haoyu, Han Ling, Pu Fifan, Xiao Yun, Shangguan Yufei, and Kong Shibua. Among them, Nye Tian, Lu Haoyu, and Xiao Yun were the strongest, while the other 4 were relatively weak. Everyone, crush all the talismans in your hand. At this time, Nye Tian took out the talismans in his hand and crushed them without hesitation. Everyone was taken aback, not knowing what Nye Tian was doing. Without the talismans in their hands, wouldn't they be eliminated directly? Everyone's talismans are the same. At the end of the sword principle competition, 100 talismans must be kept. We don't need the talismans now, but when we need them, we can just grab one, Nye Tian said with a faint smile. The others were stunned for a moment, but then they understood and crushed the talismans. Nye Tian and the others were safer without the talismans. As long as they did not leave the forbidden zone of desolate heaven, they would not be eliminated. Then, Nye Tian's gaze swept across the other 6 people and said, "The 7 of us will be divided into 3 groups. If there is an emergency, we will take care of each other as a unit. Even if we are not separated, every group must stay together." Yes. The others nodded and waited for Nye Tian's arrangement. Lu Haoyu and Pu Fifan will be in one group, Xiao Yun and Shangguan Yufei will be in another group, and the remaining 3 will be in another group. Nye Tian nodded and warned, "No matter what happens, every group must not be separated." Okay. Everyone agreed. Of course, they understood the intention of Nye Tian's arrangement. The 3 groups were a combination of strong and weak. Lu Haoyu would protect Pu Fifan, Xiao Yun would protect Shangguan Yufei, and Nye Tian would protect Han Ling and Kang Shibua. Fortunately, the 2 of them were not weak. Unless they encountered a strong enemy, they would not need Nye Tian's protection under normal circumstances. After arranging all these, Nye Tian's expression relaxed a lot, but he muttered in his heart, "Desolate Heaven Palace, I wonder how many killing swords you have arranged." Killing swords. The reason why Nye Tian asked everyone to crush the talismans was because he had other suspicions. He guessed that among the swordsmen who entered the forbidden zone of Desolate Heaven, there must be swordsmen arranged by the Desolate Heaven Palace. It was highly possible that these swordsmen could sense the talismans and treat all swordsmen as prey to slaughter. It had to be said that Nye Tian was really meticulous. He guessed correctly. Just as Nye Tian was guessing, in a canyon of the forbidden zone of Desolate Heaven, 4 black-robed figures appeared, each with an extremely powerful aura. Each of them held a sensing compass in their hands, on which countless light spots flickered. They were all the swordsmen with talismans. Chapter 1201. Heaven Desolate Forbidden Region. In the canyon, 4 black-robed swordsmen looked at the sensing compass in their hands, their eyes flickering with sharp killing intent. Nye Tian's guess was right. These 4 people were the killing swords arranged by Heaven Desolate Hall, specially slaughtering swordsmen who participated in the Sword Dao competition. Heaven Desolate Hall organized the Sword Dao competition and actually arranged killing swords in order to suppress the other sword sects. These 4 black-robed swordsmen had vigorous auras and were very powerful. Their strengths were all 6th-level Heavenly Emperor. Furthermore, they all had the realm of intermediate sword profound meaning. Such strength was absolutely considered an expert among all the swordsmen. Once they started moving, it would definitely be an abnormally bloody massacre. The 4 people smiled sinisterly, then spread out in 4 directions and started searching for their targets. In the dense forest, a swordsman hid behind a huge rock, his aura restrained to the extreme, watching the surroundings with eagle-like eyes. Swoosh! But right at this time, a sharp sword intent suddenly came from above his head. This swordsman did not even have time to let out a scream and died directly. Immediately, a black-robed figure landed, reached out, took the talisman on the corpse, and crushed it without hesitation, like crushing an ant. At the same time, the other 3 black-robed swordsmen also found their targets and instantly attacked, succeeding without exception. The targeted swordsmen died tragically on the spot before they knew what happened. In just a blink of an eye, the 4 black-robed swordsmen cleaned up all the swordsmen within dozens of kilometers, then the 4 people flew towards the next region. The 4 people were in the dark, the other swordsmen were in the light. Plus, they were very strong. Suddenly attacking, even 6th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artists could not react in time and only had the fate of being slaughtered. Heaven Desolate Hall, the leader of the Heaven Domain's 9 great sword sects, actually used the Sword Dao competition to set up a huge trap, waiting for all the swordsmen in the Heaven Domain to dive into it. Above the Heaven Desolate Great Hall, Song Shanshue and Dugu and I stared at the sensing spirit array, watching the light spots on the spirit array disappear one by one within different faces. And on the spirit array, there were over a dozen light spots flickering with scarlet light, different from the other dark green light. The scarlet light spots are the Heaven Desolate 13 swords that Senior Brother arranged, right? Duguanai smiled faintly, looking at the scarlet light spots on the sensing spirit array, and said, "Yes." Song Shan Shuen nodded slightly, his face expressionless. 13 Swords of Heavenly Wilderness. If anyone else was present and heard this title, they would definitely be shocked. This was because this was a sword Dao expert who was second only to the 2 hall masters in the Heaven Desolate Hall. Song Shanxue was really vicious, to actually throw the 13 Swords of Heaven Desolation into the forbidden area of Heaven Desolation. Rumor had it that the 13 Heavenly Desolation Swords were the elites of the Heaven Desolation Hall, who were groomed to help the Heaven Desolation Hall deal with some extremely difficult problems. The 4 black-robed swordsmen were only 4 of the 13 Swords of Infinite Wasteland. There were 9 others who were doing the same thing in the forbidden area of Infinite Wasteland. Senior Brother's thoughts are indeed deep. 13 swords have been unleashed at the same time. I'm afraid it won't be long before this sword competition ends. Duguni's lips curled into a smile as he spoke with some disappointment. With the 13 Heavenly Desolation swords being executed at the same time, it would take at most a few days for the tens of thousands of swordsmen to be slaughtered, leaving at most 100 alive. The Heaven Desolation Hall was really vicious, to actually let tens of thousands of swordsmen die in the forbidden area of Infinite Wasteland. I'll give the 13 of them 1 day. After 1 day, regardless of the outcome, the 13 of them will leave the forbidden area. Song Shanxue's face was indifferent and expressionless. The 13 Swords of Heaven Desolation only had 1 day, after which they would leave the forbidden area of Infinite Wasteland. However, by that time, at least half of the swordsmen who participated in the sword competition would die. Dugunai smiled faintly, but his gaze towards Song Shanxue was filled with a tinge of strangeness, as though he was pondering about something. In a remote valley in the forbidden area of Infinite Wasteland, several figures were hiding. One of them had flying silver hair and a sharp gaze. It was Nie Tian. I've already sensed that there are no other swordsmen around. We're safe here, Nie Tian said faintly, but his expression was not relaxed at all. He had already discovered that the sword formation of the forbidden area of Infinite Wasteland had a certain suppression on his perception. He could only sense everything within a 5-kilometer radius, and any further would be extremely blurry. Moreover, he could not expand his divine sense all the time, which consumed too much of his mental strength. Lu Haoyu, guard outside the valley. Nie Tian glanced at Lu Haoyu and said to the latter, "Yes." Lu Haoyu responded. His figure moved, hiding on a giant tree outside the valley, and like an eagle, he stared at everything around him. Are we just going to wait like this? In the valley, Shangguan Yufei disapproved of Nie Tian's actions, and even felt that the latter was too cowardly. He obviously had terrifying strength, but he hid in a valley like a turtle. Wasn't he crazy? Shangguan Yufei participated in the sword competition to show off her skills and meet the sword geniuses of other sword sects? Since the day she was born, she had been staying in the abyss of still water. This was her first time coming to the outside world, so of course she was very curious. Let's wait like this. Nie Tian glanced at Shangguan Yufei and said indifferently, without explaining anything. He had read countless people, and of course he could see that Shangguan Yufei was a young lady with no experience. She probably still thought that the sword competition was just a competition, and it didn't matter whether she won or lost. She never thought that once her identity was exposed, once she lost, she would lose her life. Shangguan Yufei didn't realize that the sword competition was a bloody life and death gamble, and the loser would undoubtedly die. If Nie Tian was alone, of course, he wouldn't hide in the valley, but he had Kong Shibua, Pu Fifan and others with him, and he had to ensure their safety, so even if he had to suffer a little, it didn't matter. Nie Tian's current idea was very simple, that was to wait quietly until it was almost over, and then find a way to get the talisman. You! Shangguan Yufei's beautiful eyes flickered, and she was irritated by Nie Tian's stubborn attitude. She growled in a low voice, "Coward! Yufei!" Xiao Yun frowned, and quickly stopped Shangguan Yufei. Shangguan Yufei didn't understand Nie Tian's intention, but Xiao Yun was very clear, and he also agreed with Nie Tian's approach. The sword competition was not important, but the ancient sword tomb. As long as he could enter the ancient sword tomb, what was wrong with hiding for a while? The corner of Nie Tian's mouth slightly twitched, but he wasn't angry. Shangguan Yufei was too simple, and he just treated it as a child throwing a tantrum. "I don't want to stay here." At this moment Kang Shibua, who had just dealt with Shangguan Yufei, stood up and said word by word with a cold face, "I want to go out." Nie Tian's eyes slightly narrowed, and then he immediately understood, and said in a deep voice, "Kang Shibua, if you go out of the valley now, you will die. You are too weak, and it is impossible for you to avenge your second uncle. Not to mention a swordsman like Yin Jiwei, even if you meet someone on the Earth Sword ranking, you won't be able to defeat them." Chapter 1202. When Kang Shibua took the first step, Nie Tian knew that he wanted to find Yin Jiwei for revenge. This kind of thinking was too laughable and childish. Yin Jiwei was eager for Kang Shibua to find him so that he could get rid of a future threat. Kang Shibua was a genius swordsman. As long as he was given 10 or even 5 years, he would definitely catch up with Yin Jiwei. At that time, it would be easy for him to take revenge. "I want revenge!" Suddenly, Kang Shibua roared furiously. His eyes were crimson red and bloodshot, and his handsome face was slightly savage. Nie Tian could not help but frown. He did not expect Kang Shibua to have so much hatred. It seemed that the dead second uncle was very important to him. "Okay." At this time, Shangguan Yufei spoke again and said, "I will go with you. I will help you take revenge." Nie Tian's eyes glanced at Shangguan Yufei. Why did this missy want to join in the fun at this time? "Yufei!" Xiao Yun stopped Shangguan Yufei with an ugly expression. Han Ling and the others were also stunned and did not know what to do. "Kang Shibua, if you want revenge, I will not stop you. But now you are in the same group as me. I am the group leader and have the right to order you. If you dare to take half a step out of this canyon, I will kill you with my own hands." Nie Tian's eyes suddenly darkened and his face became gloomy as he stared at Kang Shibua and said. His voice was as cold as ice. Everyone stared at Nie Tian with their mouths agape. Sensing the coldness surging around Nie Tian, their eyes began to tremble. Kang Shibua stared at Nie Tian in surprise. In the end, he did not take a step forward. Instead, he roared, "Why don't you let me take revenge?" "Revenge?" Nie Tianling laughed and said, "Do you know what revenge is? Before you have the strength, you want to find your enemy. This is not revenge, this is suicide." No one knew the desire for revenge better than Nie Tian. Ever since he was reborn, he thought about revenge every moment. Even now that he was in the divine realm of the heaven realm, he could only suppress his desire for revenge because he was not strong enough. Anger without strength was meaningless. Suicide? Kang Shibua was stunned. His expression became sluggish, and his eyes suddenly became disappointed. The anger in his eyes gradually turned into calmness. Nie Tian was right. If he went to find Yin Jiwei now, it was tantamount to suicide. The coldness in Nie Tian's eyes faded as he looked at Kang Shibua and said with determination, "If you really want to take revenge, then stay here. I promise you that I'll take you into the sword tomb and let you obtain the legacy of the Tao of the sword." Kang Shibua looked at Nie Tian and felt the strong confidence released by the latter. His eyes could not help but flicker. Kang Shibua looked at Tian. He felt the strong confidence released by Nie Tian. Shangguan Yufei was dumbfounded. She hadn't expected Nie Tian, who was so gentle when he was quiet, to be so terrifying when he was enraged. Nie Tian's expression did not change, but he laughed in his heart and said, "If I can't handle you kids, How can I be the #1 war god in the heaven realm? Mr. Nye. Right at this time, a voice sounded out in Nye Tian's mind. It was precisely Lu Haoyu who transmitted over. Nye Tian's divine sense moved, his gaze involuntarily turning intent. He shook his head helplessly and said, "Someone's coming. Looks like we have to change places." Nye Tian sensed that several figures were currently sprinting wildly in the direction of the canyon. It was definitely Kong Sherbua's angry roar just now that attracted them. Fortunately, these few people's strengths were not strong, all only around 3rd level Heavenly Emperor strength. Their Sword Dao realm was not high either, only Sword Soul realm. Nye Tian and the rest walked out of the canyon and originally wanted to leave, but they were a step too late. Several figures already came out. It was precisely those few people that he sensed. The arrivals were a total of 4 people, clearly a small team. The one in the lead was a middle-aged swordsman with a knife scar on his face. His strength was 4th level Heavenly Emperor. A pair of cold eyes glanced at Nye Tian, then immediately shifted to Shangguan Yufei, releasing a lascivious light. There were a total of 4 people, clearly a small team. The one in the lead was a middle-aged swordsman with a knife scar on his face. His strength was at the 4th level of Heavenly Emperor. A pair of cold eyes glanced at Nye Tian, then shifted to Shangguan Yufei, releasing a lustful light. "Heh brothers, us brothers' luck is pretty good. We can even run into a shrewish little girl. We can have a good time." The scar-faced swordsman chuckled, his greedy gaze roaming Shangguan Yufei's body without any scruples. He saw that Nye Tian, Xiao Yun, and the rest were all young swordsmen, seemingly only in their 20s. There was also Kong Sherbua and Pu Fifan, these 2 children. He naturally would not take it to heart. He was even puzzled, such a strange team, where did they get the courage to participate in the Sword Dao competition? Courting death. Shangguan Yufei had a belly full of anger with nowhere to vent. Being teased so blatantly at this moment, how could she tolerate it? With a shout, her figure moved, directly stabbing a sword out towards the scar-faced swordsman. Whoosh! Shangguan Yufei's sword slashed out. Sword intent erupted. It actually gave off a crisp sound. Following that, a sword image condensed from water vapor appeared, rolling over. "Yoho, what a shrewish little girl. Your father likes it." Facing Shangguan Yufei's attack, the scar-faced swordsman merely smiled. A greenish-black heavy sword appeared in his hand, and he slashed out with it. Within the violent sword intent, countless thorns and vines were released, as if they were dancing giant snakes, surging out in all directions. Amen. When Shangguan Yufei saw this scene, her brows furrowed slightly, panic flickering in her eyes. She did not expect that the other party's move was so huge. He actually wanted to take her life. Sigh. Nye Tian watched by the side and could not help sighing lightly. Shangguan Yufei's strength was not weak. Even if she was only 3rd level Heavenly Emperor, her still water sword intent was bizarre to the extreme. If she fought with all her might, she could similarly kill the scar-faced swordsman. Unfortunately, Shangguan Yufei did not see the situation clearly at all, only treating this as a contest and not a life-and-death struggle. But under this sword move of the scar-faced swordsman, he exerted all of his strength and did not show any mercy. It was naturally hard for Shangguan Yufei to resist. Just as the wildly dancing thorny vines were about to hit Shangguan Yufei, they suddenly paused and then disappeared. Shangguan Yufei was taken aback, immediately looking at that scar-faced swordsman. The latter actually became a headless corpse. Nye Tian took a step out. It was precisely him who made a move to decapitate the scar-faced swordsman. Shangguan Yufei, you watch clearly. Sword Dao competition is not a martial arts competition, but a life-and-death duel. Nye Tian looked at Shangguan Yufei and said solemnly, "You show mercy to him, but he won't show mercy to you." Shangguan Yufei was dumbfounded there, and could not react for a long time. Fortunately, Nye Tian made a move in time just now. Otherwise, she would be seriously injured even if she did not die. She could not understand why the other party wanted to kill her the moment they met. Even if the other party was provoking her, she only made a move with the intention of teaching him a lesson and did not think of killing the other party. Her thinking was completely wrong. It was just a naive view of the world of a little girl who had never left home. Only then did the other few swordsmen react, looking at Nie Tian with shocked faces. They did not see how the latter made a move at all just now. Run. In virtually an instant, the same thought emerged in the minds of the few people. Immediately, they turned around and fled, not even looking back. Unfortunately, it was already too late. In the sky, several streaks of piercing sword intent whistled out, directly killing the few people. The person who made a move was precisely Lu Haoyu. Chapter 1203. As the mocking voice faded, a white-robed figure appeared. His eyes were filled with coldness as he locked onto Nie Tian. Yin Jiwei. Seeing the figure in front of him, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. Why did he encounter this god of death at this time? What? Are you unhappy to meet me? Yin Jiwei stared coldly at Nie Tian. He hated Nie Tian for injuring him with a sword and embarrassing him in front of everyone. No one would be happy to meet a mad dog that bites anyone it sees. Nie Tian sneered and said coldly. Yin Jiwei was very strong, which made Nie Tian rather fearful. Most importantly, the power of Nie Tian's sword skills would be greatly reduced if he could not use the Heaven/Sword. Even if he used the Dark Star Ghost Kill now, he might not be able to hurt Yin Jiwei. It's you. Seeing Yin Jiwei appear, Kang Shibua's eyes surged with terrifying anger. Scarlet flame sword essence surged from his body, and the surrounding space seemed to be burning. Nie Tian glanced at Kang Shibua, motioning him not to be impulsive. Kang Shibua stood on the spot and did not move. He deeply remembered Nie Tian's words and would not be reckless again. Yin Jiwei, what do you want? Lu Haoyu's figure moved and came to the side of Nie Tian and the others. He looked at Yin Jiwei and roared. Humph! Yin Jiwei sneered and raised his eyebrows. I'm going to kill all of you. Now that they were in the forbidden region of Infinite Wasteland, Yin Jiwei would not be afraid of the identity of Lu Haoyu and the others. Lu Haoyu and the others died in the forbidden region of Infinite Wasteland, and Mo Qianjun would not allow them to die in the hands of others. Moreover, the sword principle competition was a fair battle. Even if Mo Qianjun knew, he might not attack Yin Jiwei. A mad dog that bites anyone it sees. Nie Tianling sneered. He spread out his divine sense, and the 9 yuan meridians in his body began to circulate crazily. Yuan energy surged around his body, ready to burst forth with terrifying power in the next moment. Since he couldn't use the absolute sword Heaven Slash, Nie Tian would use the dragon vein to fight Yin Jiwei. Nie Tian hadn't fully used his dual meridians ever since he'd integrated them. The opponents he'd met before were basically killed in one move by the dragon meridians. At this moment, he could use Yin Jiwei to verify the power of the dual meridians fusion. Still want to resist? Yin Jiwei smiled cold. A terrifying silver immortal soul sword intent appeared behind him. The silver-white sword intent was like flowing mercury, spreading in the air. The terrifying sword intent aura filled the air. What a terrifying aura! Lu Haoyu and the others narrowed their eyes and their hearts trembled. After not seeing him for half a month, Yin Jiwei's sword intent had become even more terrifying, much stronger than before. The silver spirit sword essence is indeed terrifying. Xiao Yun sensed the silver-white sword intent behind Yin Jiwei, his gaze trembling a little. He could perceive that with his strength, the still water sword intent could not contend with the silver immortal sword intent. This was not to say that the still water sword intent was weaker than the silver immortal sword intent, but that Xiao Yun's own strength was insufficient. He only had 5th level Heavenly Emperor strength, initial rank Sword Profound Realm, while Yin Jiwei had 7th level Heavenly Emperor strength, high-rank sword profound realm. The disparity between the two people was too great. The still water sword intent was also unable to make up for it. But Xiao Yun was still very young, while Yin Jiwei was already over 100 years old. Advancing in the future would be even harder. Hence, the former's sword Dao talent far surpassed the latter. You guys retreat. Nie Tian's gaze turned intent, the corners of his mouth twitching a little, indicating for Lu Haoyu and the rest to retreat. Yin Jiwei was a lunatic, killing people on sight. It was best for the others not to approach. Just the likes of you also want to fight with me? Yin Jiwei smiled cold, speaking arrogantly, but he was incredibly surprised in his heart. Half a month ago, when he fought with Nie Tian, the latter was still just 4th level Heavenly Emperor. Now, he was actually already 5th level Heavenly Emperor. The speed of his strength advancement was also too fast. 5th level Heavenly Emperor was the watershed of the Heavenly Emperor realm. Nie Tian could actually break through effortlessly. It was seriously bizarre. Only at this moment did Yin Jiwei know that Nie Tian was a very terrifying opponent. He must be killed. Otherwise, it would definitely become a great disaster. Did you forget? You were defeated by me with one sword before. Nie Tian smiled faintly, a reddish-gold lightning sea appearing behind him. The supreme dragon chi after dual meridians fused was released. The surrounding space was pulled tight, as if it was going to be torn apart in the next instant. Courting death. Having his scar touched, Yin Jiwei was immediately greatly enraged, the silver immortal blade in his hand stabbing out. A silvery white sword image appeared, several hundred meters in size. A horrifying aura exploded out. The ground was directly torn apart. The trees within 1,000 meters in the surroundings were directly crushed down by the sword intent air billows. Yin Jiwei's sword intent was not vast and mighty, but it was abnormally swift and fierce. The sword intent was thick to the extreme, giving people a suffocating feeling. Supreme Dragon Soul, come on out. Facing Yin Jiwei's fatal sword, Nie Tian's gaze was like water, calm and without ripples. Only the firmest determination to kill did not change from start to end. Since he used the supreme dual meridians, he had to utterly crush Yin Jiwei. Roar! When the mighty voice landed, a crimson gold colossal dragon appeared in the void. A heaven-shaking dragon roar echoed out, shaking heavenly emperors. The trees within several tens of thousands of meters in the surroundings were like small saplings, directly falling to the ground from the impact of the berserk air billows. A full 3,000 meters in size crimson gold colossal dragon appeared, the power of lightning surging around it, circulating like lightning. And on the outer layer of the dragon's body, a glaring sun-like light flickered, appearing incomparably majestic, making people prostrate themselves in worship. What kind of power is this? By the side, Xiao Yun and the rest were completely dumbfounded, the shock in their hearts unable to be any greater. It was hard to imagine that Nie Tian could actually release such terrifying power. The others even had dazed gazes, directly petrified on the spot, opening their mouths wide, unable to speak. Yin Jiwei felt an incomparably vast aura pressing down on him. His gaze stagnated, unable to suppress the panic that flashed across his eyes. He completely did not expect that there was such a vast power hidden in Nie Tian's body. If he had known this earlier, he would definitely not have dared to provoke Nie Tian. Unfortunately, it was too late now. He was the one who forced Nie Tian to use the power of the supreme dual meridians, so he had to pay the price for it. Boom! The body of the crimson gold colossal dragon rolled. The power of lightning and the power of the sun suddenly erupted, drowning the silvery white sword shadow directly in the dragon's might, unable to resist at all. Back then, when Nie Tian and Lin Yi's dual meridians merged for the first time, he could directly fight against an expert like Shi Wushang. Now that he had merged dual meridians alone, his power was naturally even stronger. However, Nie Tian did not dare to use the supreme dual meridians in public. It was too ostentatious. If it attracted the attention of people with ulterior motives, it would be very bad. The power of the supreme dual meridians was too strong, everyone wanted it, just like Shi Wushang, and even an ancient expert like the Soul-Eater Demon King coveted the supreme dual meridians. One could imagine what other people would think when they saw the supreme dual meridians. Since Yin Jiwei had seen the supreme dual meridians, then he must die. Boom! The crimson gold colossal dragon rolled over, and Yin Jiwei was completely stunned, unable to resist. As long as the crimson gold colossal dragon pressed over, Yin Jiwei would definitely die, and his soul would definitely perish. However, at this moment, Nie Tian suddenly frowned and shouted, "There's someone behind, be careful." In the next instant, the meteor wings appeared behind Nie Tian, and he directly gave up on Yin Jiwei, flying towards Kong Shibua. Chapter 1204. Just as Nie Tian was about to kill Yin Jiwei, there was a sudden change. A black-robed figure appeared on the holographic projection, stabbing towards Kong Shibua with a murderous sword. The black-robed figure's concealment technique was very good, and Lu Haoyu, Xiao Yun, and the others did not notice him. Moreover, this person was very strong, and even if Lu Haoyu and the others noticed him, they might not be able to save Kong Shibua. At the critical moment, Nie Tian directly gave up on Yin Jiwei, and his figure flashed as he punched towards the sky. Although Nie Tian really wanted to kill Yin Jiwei, Kong Shibua's life was clearly more important. Not to mention that Nie Tian had already promised the Crimson Flame Demonic Palace that he would definitely protect Kong Shibua's safety. Just based on Kong Shibua's talent in swordsmanship alone, Nie Tian could not bear to see him die so tragically. Nie Tian's figure moved, and the crimson golden dragon that was surging towards Yin Jiwei immediately turned and roared into the sky. The giant dragon formed by the dual meridians of the sovereign martial artist was so strong that even the void could not withstand the terrifying pressure, and it seemed like it would split at any time. "You cowardly scoundrel, come out!" Nie Tian let out a deep roar, and the power of thunder and the power of the blazing sun burst out of the crimson golden dragon, condensing into countless giant flaming lightning bolts that rushed out like long snakes, surging fiercely. In the next moment, a surprised voice sounded in the sky, followed by a dull thud. A black-robed figure appeared in the void, and was actually forced to retreat by the mighty dragon's might. His figure trembled, and he was finally sent flying. Lu Haoyu and the others were stunned, and they looked up into the sky to see a black-robed figure in a bloody mess. Everyone was shocked, and they did not know when this black-robed figure had approached them. Fortunately, Nie Tian had acted in time, or the consequences would have been unimaginable. How is this possible? The black-robed figure was stunned, and his eyes were filled with great shock, unable to believe the scene in front of him. He had wanted to kill Kong Shibua and the others while Nie Tian and Yin Jiwei were fighting, but he had never imagined that Nie Tian would be able to detect his presence. This was the forbidden area of infinite wasteland, where there was the suppression of the sword formation. Ordinary swordsmen's perception was greatly suppressed, and even if they were within 100 meters, they might not be able to detect it. He and Nie Tian were thousands of meters apart, but the latter was able to detect his presence the moment he attacked. It was really strange. "You're from the Heaven Wasteland Hall?" Nie Tian stood on the golden-red dragon with disdain in his eyes, as if a dragon god had descended to the world. He had guessed correctly. The black-clothed martial artist in front of him was from the Heaven Desolate Palace, one of the 13 swords of Heaven Desolate. The black-clothed cultivator's gaze sank slightly as fear flashed in his eyes. He had not expected Nie Tian to be able to guess this. "Looks like my guess is correct." Nie Tian smiled faintly as he looked at Yin Jiwei below and bellowed, "Yin Jiwei, are you still not going to scram?" Yin Jiwei suddenly reacted as if he had just woken up from a dream. His gaze trembled for a moment, but he did not say a word as his figure moved and he left. He had obviously been frightened by what had just happened. If Nye Tian had not suddenly changed his target, he would have died. The mad dog has left. It's time to kill the mouse. After confirming that Yin Ji-wei had left, Nye Tian's cold gaze locked onto the black-clothed cultivator with a murderous intent. He had scared Yin Ji-wei away because he did not want the latter to get in the way. "Kid, you're too arrogant." The black-clothed cultivator's gaze trembled. Nye Tian did not take him seriously at all, which greatly infuriated him. With a low roar, a black longsword appeared in the black-clothed cultivator's hand. The shape was extremely strange, like a curved snake, and it emitted a sinister aura. "Humph!" Nye Tian swept his gaze across the black-clothed cultivator with a disdainful face. "Die for me." The black-clothed cultivator felt Nye Tian's disdain, and became even angrier. The black longsword pierced out diagonally, and a whistling sound rang out in the air. After which, a long black snake appeared. It was actually condensed from sword will and was thousands of meters long. It opened its bloody mouth and rushed towards Nye Tian crazily. "Want to escape?" Nye Tianlun coldly smiled. The black-clothed cultivator was not stupid. This sword was just a feint. His silhouette flickered at the same time, wanting to escape. The anger he had shown earlier was just a facade, wanting to confuse Nye Tian. If it was anyone else, they would definitely fall for it. Unfortunately, the person he was facing was Nye Tian. Nye Tian's gaze darkened. He flapped his wings and the huge dragon beneath his feet disappeared. His silhouette was like lightning, directly bypassing the long black snake and appearing not far behind the black-clothed cultivator. Holographic imprisonment activate. In the blink of an eye, Nye Tian's divine sense moved and a terrifying spiritual deterrent appeared. An invisible holographic divine rune condensed into a spiritual net, enveloping the black-clothed cultivator. The black-clothed cultivator felt his divine sense tremble and exclaimed in surprise. In the next moment, his expression became sluggish. "Die!" Nye Tian flapped his wings and a sharp starlight blade whistled past, directly piercing the black-clothed cultivator's chest. The latter did not even have the time to scream and died on the spot. His figure fell to the ground. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Lu Haoyu and the rest had not reacted to what was going on. Nye Tian's figure descended and raised his palm. A sensing compass appeared in his hand. "Heaven Wasteland Palace, you have indeed done something. You actually want to kill all the swordsmen in the Sword Dao competition?" Nye Tian's gaze swept across the sensing compass and saw countless light spots moving. He immediately understood. Anger burned in his eyes and his body slightly trembled. The sensing compass confirmed his conjecture. The Heaven Wasteland Palace arranged killing swords in Heaven Wasteland's forbidden region. The black-clothed swordsman who was killed in front of him was just one of the countless killing swords. No idea how many more such people there were in Heaven Wasteland's forbidden region. "Mr. Nye, are you all right?" Lu Haoyu and the rest surrounded, looking at Nye Tian in shock. "I'm fine. Let's leave first." Nye Tian took a look and sensed that there were several scarlet light spots currently sprinting over. Hence, he did not dare to delay and left right away. The 7 people's figures were very fast, vanishing without a trace in a twinkle. After a moment, 3 black-clothed figures arrived in the air and landed beside the corpse on the ground. 13th brother. The 3 people roared at the same time when they saw the corpse on the ground. Violent rage erupted like a snowy mountain, the surrounding space started trembling. The black-clothed swordsman killed by Nye Tian was precisely Desolate 13 of the Heaven Wasteland 13 swords, the weakest one among the 13 swords. Even the weakest one had the strength of a 6th-level Heavenly Emperor, sufficient to annihilate most of the swordsmen in Heaven Wasteland's forbidden region. Unfortunately, he was unlucky and encountered Nye Tian. Standing beside Desolate 13 were Desolate 10, Desolate 11, and Desolate 12. The 4 of them were a team. But now, someone died. How could they not be furious? The heaven wasteland 13 swords grew up together. Although they were not biological brothers, their relationship was closer than blood. 13th brother being killed, the grief in the hearts of the other 3 could be imagined. 10th brother, what should we do? Desolate 12 panted heavily, clearly furious to the extreme, as he asked solemnly. Revenge. Desolate 10's expression was extremely grim as he squeezed out 2 words from between his teeth and said, 13th brother, no matter who killed you, I must make him pay the price in blood. Chapter 1205. At the same moment when Nye Tian killed Desolate 13, in the Tianhuang Great Hall. How is this possible? In the Great Hall, Song Shanshue stared at a scarlet dot of light on the sensory spiritual formation. His calm expression revealed a hint of panic. Of course, he could sense that Desolate 13's aura had disappeared from the scarlet dot of light and turned into another person's aura. This undoubtedly meant that Desolate 13 was dead. Although Desolate 13 was the weakest among the 13 swords of Tianhuang, he still had the strength of a 6th-level heavenly emperor and was at the intermediate sword ultimacy realm. In addition to his near-perfect concealment technique, he had a higher chance of winning even when facing a swordsman like Yin Jiwei. Song Shanshue had investigated before. Yin Jiwei's strength was already at the pinnacle of all the swordsmen participating in the Sword Wei competition. If even such a person could not kill Desolate 13, then who could Desolate 13 have died to? Desolate 13 is actually dead. Duguni's gaze flickered. There was a hint of strangeness amidst the coldness. Following that, the corners of his lips could not help but twitch into a smile as he muttered, "Things are getting interesting now." Duguni's gaze was fixed on the scarlet dot of light on the sensory spiritual formation. He vaguely felt that this aura was familiar. The sensory compass could sense the swordsman's aura and then reflect it on the sensory spiritual formation. Hence, Song Shanshue and Dugunai were able to determine the identities of the 13 swords of Tianhuang just based on the aura of the light dot. Desolate 13's death was definitely beyond their expectations. "Junior brother, what did you see?" Song Shanshue could not help but ask when he sensed that there was something wrong with Duguni's gaze. Dugunai smiled faintly and said, "The person who killed Desolate 13 seems to be an old friend. If it's really him, I won't be surprised. However, I can't be sure yet. Let's wait and see." Dugunai could vaguely sense the familiar aura of the proud sword intent from the scarlet dot of light. However, this aura was too weak, and he could not be sure that this person was Nye Tian. Moreover, even if this person was Nye Tian, Dugunai had no intention of making a move. The person behind him didn't order him to kill Nye Tian. He remembered that the matter of killing Nye Tian was handed over to the Azura's Gate. "Nye Tian, if it's really you, I'm afraid my senior brother's 13 swords of heavenly desolation will be in danger." Dugunai smiled cold in his heart. He was completely enjoying the show. Song Shanshue saw that Dugunai had no intention of speaking his mind. He frowned, but there was nothing he could do. Although Song Shanshue was the hall master of the Heaven Wasteland Hall, he did not dare to look down on Dugunai. In fact, he had to show enough respect, as the two of them were on equal footing. Song Shanshue had never interacted with Nye Tian before, so he was completely unfamiliar with Nye Tian's sword aura. In a hidden canyon in the forbidden zone of Infinite Wasteland. After running for a long time, Lu Haoyu couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Nye, who was that person just now?" "An assassin arranged by the Heaven Wasteland Hall." Nye Tian stared at the compass and said indifferently. He was considering whether to throw the compass away. With the compass, he could see the whereabouts of everyone, including the other 12 scarlet light spots. Nye Tian speculated that these 12 people were the remaining assassins of Heaven Wasteland. However, if he carried the compass with him, these 12 assassins would be able to sense his whereabouts at any time, which would be equivalent to exposing himself. If Nye Tian was alone, He could carry the compass with him and wait for the other assassins to come and kill them one by one. However, he was currently with Kong Shirbua and the others. If more than one assassin came at once, he would not be able to protect the others. If he was separated from the others, Nie Tian would not be at ease. After thinking about it, he finally decided to destroy the compass. This is the compass obtained from the assassin. It can sense the whereabouts of all swordsmen. At this time, Xiao Yun walked over and said while staring at the compass, "The people of the Heaven Wasteland Hall are really vicious. The so-called Sword Dao competition is clearly a trap to kill swordsmen." The others also realized what was going on and looked at Nie Tian in astonishment. Only now did they know how wise it was for Nie Tian to crush the talisman after entering the forbidden zone of Infinite Wasteland. If he carried the talisman on him, it would be no different from becoming a live target of the 13 swords of Heaven Wasteland, waiting to be killed. Yes. Nie Tian nodded and said, "Carrying the compass will always be troublesome, it's better to destroy it." Wait. Xiao Yun took a step forward and stopped Nie Tian. "You killed an assassin of the Heaven Wasteland Hall. The other assassins will definitely be furious and will definitely come for this compass. If you destroy the compass, these assassins will not be able to sense the aura of the compass and will definitely be furious, which will only stimulate them to kill more people." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He had indeed not thought of this. He glanced at Xiao Yun, who had a sinister smile on his face, as if he had a good idea, and asked, "What do you want to do with this compass?" "Give it away," Xiao Yun said with a faint smile. "As long as the compass is given away, for example, to someone like Yin Jiwei, then wouldn't the Sword Dao competition be much more interesting?" Nie Tian's eyes flickered as he immediately understood Xiao Yun's meaning. The assassins of the Heaven Wasteland Hall did not see who killed Desolate 13, so whoever held the compass was the murderer. The compass was a hot potato, and whoever held it would be hunted down by the 13 swords of Heaven Wasteland. The most ideal situation was to give the compass to a swordsman like Yin Jiwei, who was strong enough and vicious enough to deal with the assassins of the Heaven Wasteland Hall. "All right, let's do that." Nie Tian smiled and readily agreed with Xiao Yun's idea. "Then how do we give it away?" Han Ling and the rest walked over and asked with a puzzled expression. "It's very simple." The corner of Nie Tian's mouth curled up as he threw the compass into the air thousands of meters away. A glaring sword intent surged around the compass, forming a dazzling sword shadow. "Let's leave." After taking a glance at the compass, Nie Tian blurred into action and prepared to find another place to hide. The compass had already been thrown out, and it would soon be seen by many people. Such a good item would obviously belong to the strongest. Nie Tian believed that with Yin Jiwei's terrifying battle strength, it should not be a problem for him to snatch the compass. The figures of the few left the canyon and quickly disappeared. "Look, what's that?" Very quickly, some swordsmen noticed a glaring sword shadow floating in the air, as if there was a compass-like object in the sword shadow. "It must be something good. I'll go get it." Some swordsmen could not resist the temptation and soared into the sky, flying towards the compass. Almost at the same time, the aura of sword intent surged into the sky from different locations. Dozens of figures appeared at the same time, all aiming for the compass. "All of you scram!" At this moment, a tyrannical voice rang out as a white-robed figure appeared. Silver blades surged out like a sky full of arrows, forcing the others to retreat. Chapter 1206. High up in the sky, the appearance of the induction compass caused many swordsmen to fight over it. Yin Jiwei's figure appeared domineering and sharp, directly forcing the other swordsmen away and obtaining the induction compass. "Huh!" Yin Jiwei saw many flickering light spots on the induction compass and was stunned for a moment, then reacted and laughed wildly. "So this compass can sense the position of other swordsmen, great!" Yin Jiwei had been looking for other swordsmen to kill, but his efficiency was very low. Now that he had the induction compass, it was much easier. The surrounding hundreds and thousands of swordsmen stood in the air. Although they knew that the induction compass was a good thing, they did not dare to fight over it. Yin Jiwei was once the first person on the Earth Sword ranking, and now he was ranked 29th on the Heaven Sword ranking. His strength was comparable to those famous experts of the Sword Tao, so he was not someone to be provoked. At this time, behind a huge rock below, several gazes saw everything in the air, but they all sneered in their hearts. Yin Jiwei is indeed domineering, to be able to snatch the induction compass so quickly. Xiao Yun laughed, his eyes burning as he looked at the white figure in the air, ready to watch a big show. Yin Jiwei, if the induction compass was really a good thing, would I still throw it out? Nie Tian's lips curled into a cold smile. He really wanted to see what kind of battle would happen between Yin Jiwei and the assassin of the Heaven Wasteland Hall. A bunch of ants. At this time, Yin Jiwei's eyes flickered with a cold chill, instantly filled with killing intent, as he coldly looked at the surrounding swordsmen. The others felt the bone-piercing chill hit them in the face, and their gazes immediately tightened as they subconsciously retreated. Yin Jiwei was infamous for killing people at the slightest provocation, and it was definitely not a good thing to be targeted by such a person. Leave. Everyone's first thought was to leave, and countless figures hurriedly retreated. Don't you think it's a little too late to escape now? Yin Jiwei smiled coldly as the silver soul blade in his hand spun, and it actually swept up a silver vortex. Countless silver blades gushed out like a rain of arrows that covered the sky, and they blasted towards all directions. Ah! Suddenly, tragic screams sounded in the void. Many swordsmen were hit by the silver spirit sword will and died on the spot. Yin Jiwei's strength was too formidable. The other swordsmen were basically all first-level or second-level Heavenly Emperor strength, and did not have the ability to resist the Silver Soul sword intent at all. Only a small number of swordsmen whose strength was at the 4th-level Heavenly Emperor and above relied on their own sword intent to evade the killing intent. Hundreds of corpses fell from the sky, and a bloody scene appeared. It was extremely tragic. This madman! When the crowd saw this scene, they all gnashed their teeth in hatred. Yin Jiwei was simply a mad dog, killing anyone he saw without any reason. This kind of person was tyrannical, it was simply too terrifying. Are you scared? Yin Jiwei's eyes were filled with killing intent as he looked at the surviving swordsmen around him. The corner of his mouth curled up into a cold, murderous look. He was like a god of death, standing in the air, and looking down at the ants around him. He enjoyed it very much when others showed cowardice in front of him. It gave him a perverted sense of satisfaction. Brat, it's you. But right at this time, several extremely gloomy and cold voices sounded out. Following that, phantom-like figures appeared. Several streaks of austere sword intent appeared like specters. The next instant, a series of screams sounded out. The surrounding dozen over-swordsmen were actually directly annihilated by the phantom-like figures, turning into blood light and dissipating. Amen. The scene that suddenly happened made Yin Jiwei stunned. His gaze swept past the 3 black-clothed figures and actually felt 3 terrifying killing intent envelop over towards him. What thick killing intent! Yin Jiwei was startled inwardly, bean-sized beads of sweat seeping out on his forehead. These 3 people were all powerhouses, especially that kind of piercingly cold killing intent. It actually made him have a feeling of being targeted by a vicious wolf. Those dozen over-swordsmen earlier, their strengths were not weak, all 4th-level Heavenly Emperor and above. They were actually instantly killed by these 3 people. The terror of these 3 people's strengths could be imagined. The 3 black-clothed swordsmen were none other than precisely Desolate 10, Desolate 11, and Desolate 12, who were in the same group as Desolate 13. The 3 people's gazes locked onto Yin Jiwei tightly, all already determined that the latter was the murderer who killed Desolate 13. Actually, as long as the 3 people sensed slightly, they would discover that the aura on the sensing compass had changed. Yin Jiwei had only just obtained the sensing compass. But they were blinded by anger and would not think so much. Whoever had the sensing compass in their hands was the murderer. Even taking a step back, even if Yin Jiwei was not the murderer, he must die too. A swordsman with this kind of strength was a scourge if left alive. A good show is about to begin. At this time, Nie Tian's figure was hidden under a huge rock. Looking at the scene in the sky, the corners of his mouth suffused with a cold smile. The battle between the Heaven Desolate Hall's assassins and Yin Jiwei, just thinking about it made people excited. This battle, regardless of the outcome, Nie Tian was very happy to see it. Mr. Nie, do you feel that Yin Jiwei will be the Heaven Desolate Hall's people's match? Han Ling had a doubtful look and could not resist asking. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, Yin Jiwei's strength is 7th level Heavenly Emperor, high-rank sword profound realm. Coupled with his silver soul sword intent, there aren't many swordsmen who can beat him in the entire Heaven realm either. The Heaven Desolate Hall's 3 assassins are all 6th level Heavenly Emperor strength, middle rank sword profound realm. If the 3 people hide in the void and don't come out, perhaps there's still a chance. But confronting Yin Jiwei head-on, it's certain death. Han Ling and the rest were stunned for a moment, not expecting that Nie Tian had so much confidence in Yin Jiwei. Nie Tian smiled slightly. He was just discussing the matter as it stood. Yin Jiwei was brutal and bloodthirsty and indeed deserved to die. But his tyrannical strength was absolutely not bragging. Yin Jiwei's figure stood tall in the sky, looking at the sensing compass in his hand, and immediately understood. He was not a fool and instantly reacted. The 3 people in front of him were absolutely assassins arranged by the Heaven Desolate Hall. There had always been open and veiled strife between the 9 great sword sections. The Heaven Desolate Hall making use of the opportunity of sword Dao competition to slaughter the other sword sex swordsmen was not strange. This kind of action was very normal. If it were the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, having the opportunity to hold a sword Dao competition, they would also do the same. This sensing compass should have been obtained from other Heaven Desolate Hall assassins. These 3 people in front of me also have sensing compasses in their hands. Yin Jiwei was much calmer as he thought to himself. But he suddenly realized something and exclaimed, "Fell into a trap. They must have treated me as the murderer who killed their companions." Yin Jiwei looked at the 3 assassins and exclaimed in his heart. He suddenly recalled that these 3 people's dressing was the same as the black-clothed man who sneak attacked Nie Tian and the rest previously. This sensing compass must have come from that black-clothed swordsman previously. It's the silver-haired boy who killed the Heaven Desolate Hall assassins, then threw out the sensing compass. Yin Jiwei suddenly understood everything. His gaze trembled violently as he said in astonishment, "That boy wouldn't be trying to deliver the sensing compass to my hands, right? What a deep scheme." Nie Tian was several tens of thousands of meters away from Yin Jiwei, but his eyes of the starry sky saw the latter's expression clearly. Chapter 1207. High up in the sky, Yin Jiwei understood everything, and the fury in his heart could be imagined. His entire body was trembling, and his face was gloomy. He felt as if a 5,000-kilogram boulder was pressing down on his chest, causing his breathing to become hurried. He never thought that he would actually become a pawn being used by others. This feeling was very uncomfortable, almost driving him crazy. "Damn brat, I must kill you personally!" Yin Jiwei roared in his heart. His gaze locked onto the 3 Heaven Wasteland assassins, revealing killing intent. On the sensing compass, other scarlet light spots were rushing over. Hence, Yin Jiwei did not have much time. He must finish off the 3 people in front of him as soon as possible. Of course, he could not explain anything, because it was useless even if he did. Only the weak would go and explain. That was not what he, Yin Jiwei, needed to do. What he needed to do was to kill the 3 people in front of him. "Stinking brat, pay with your life for 13th brother." Suddenly, a fierce roar sounded. Immediately, a black-clothed figure shot out like lightning. A swift and fierce sword stabbed out. The space was like the surface of a lake, being forcefully separated. A black sword shadow came out with a loud bang. Humph! Inji smiled cold. The silver soul blade was unleashed. The silver soul sword intent actually condensed into a silver human shadow, shrouding around him, like an indomitable giant. The silver giant was 1,000 meters in size, standing tall in the sky, like a giant overlooking everything. When the silver giant's body trembled slightly, a mighty aura appeared, pressing down overwhelmingly, rolling and roaring. What a terrifying aura! The crowd below felt the terrifying aura, their gazes trembling, their expressions lifeless. This Inji actually concealed his strength. When Xiao Yun saw this scene, his face darkened slightly, and he said in surprise. When Inji and Nie Tian exchanged blows previously, he did not use this move. Otherwise, he would not have been forced into a dead end by the Supreme Dragon Soul. This is Silver Soul. Nie Tian looked at the silver giant shadow in the sky and said solemnly, unable to conceal the astonishment on his face. He also did not think that Inji silver soul sword intent was actually terrifying to this extent, to be able to condense such a terrifying silver soul. Silver soul was the silver soul true body condensed from the silver soul sword intent. In the legends, the silver soul true body condensed from the silver soul sword intent when cultivated to the limits was even more terrifying than the giant spirit true body of a peak heavenly emperor martial artist. If Nie Tian had fought with Inji previously, the latter might have been able to resist the supreme dragon soul with his silver spirit true body. It seemed like Inji had underestimated Nie Tian, so he did not use his silver immortal soul. An assassin of the Heaven Wasteland Hall, right? In front of Yin Hun, they are all ants. Inji scanned the surroundings with a murderous gaze. The gigantic silver immortal soul moved in an instant, and the gigantic silver palm pressed down like a mountain, directly crushing the black-robed swordsman into meat paste. 12th brother. Desolate 10 and Desolate 11 cried out in alarm. Clearly, they were extremely terrified. The person who attacked just now was Baron 12, but unfortunately, he was instantly killed. The 13 sky desolating swords. He did not expect to encounter such a terrifying opponent. 11th brother, leave first. This person is too strong. Only Big Brother can deal with him. Baron 10's eyes darkened and he calmed down. Sword intent surged out of his body, and at the same time, it was accompanied by a terrifying crimson blood chi, and a gigantic blood-red sword slowly condensed in the air. 10th brother. Baron 11 cried out when he saw this, and immediately reacted. Baron 10 was going to ignite his blood chi to release his strongest move to buy time for him to escape. Inji smiled cold when he saw this scene and said, "Ignite your blood chi? If your strength is the same as mine, I might be afraid, but you are too weak. Even if you ignite your blood chi, you have no chance." Everyone on the ground stared blankly, and their hearts were shocked to the extreme. Nie Tian shook his head slightly. He did not expect the friendship between the assassins of Heaven Wasteland to be so strong. One of them actually sacrificed himself to fight for a chance to live. From this point of view, these assassins could be considered to be courageous. Unfortunately, the silver immortal soul he encountered was of no use even if he ignited his blood chi. 11th brother, run! In the void, Baron 10's aura rose to the extreme, and the huge blood-colored sword around him was 1,000 meters long. With a furious roar, he slashed at Inji like a collapsing mountain. His aura surged like a raging wave, sweeping up the scattered clouds in the surroundings and roaring. In the face of Baron 10's attack, Inji showed no fear at all. There was not the slightest fluctuation in his eyes, and instead, there was a mocking look on his face. The strength of silver immortal soul was beyond imagination. The existence of Silver Immortal Soul was the reason why the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was ranked second among the 9 great sword sects. If not for the Heaven Wasteland Palace producing Duguanai, the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion might not be weaker than the Heaven Wasteland Palace. Boom! In the next moment, the blood-colored sword fell on Silver Immortal Soul, and after a loud explosion, it shattered. The blood-colored sword intent dissipated in the void, and instantly disappeared. Baron Ten's sword that was burning his blood chi couldn't shake Silver Immortal Soul at all. "Ants, all of you can die." Yin Jiwei's eyes were filled with killing intent. With a low roar, his huge palm fell, and Baron Ten died on the spot. Not even his bones were left. Baron 11's figure moved, but in the next instant, he froze, unable to move. Silver Immortal Soul's aura was too strong, and it froze the surrounding space. Baron 11's reaction was a little slower, and he was directly suppressed by the powerful aura. Schwa! Then, a silver blade flashed, and Baron 11 didn't even have time to scream before he turned into a bloody light and dissipated. Silver Immortal Soul was too strong, and the strength of these people was below Yin Jiwei's, so they didn't have the slightest ability to resist. Are these the assassins of the Heaven Wasteland Palace? What a mess! Yin Jiwei killed 3 assassins in the blink of an eye, and there was a hint of hostility in his eyes. He spoke in a cold tone, and his face was full of disdain. This! The crowd below looked up at the sky, and they all gasped. They hadn't completely recovered from the shock. Yin Jiwei's figure moved, and the sword intent around him dissipated. Silver Immortal Soul disappeared. He took a look at the sensing compass, and his eyes flickered with terrifying rage. The sensing compass directly shattered. "Silver-haired brat, we won't rest until one of us is dead." Yin Jiwei was used by others, and he was furious to the extreme. He roared in his heart, and his figure moved, leaving directly. He wasn't stupid, and directly destroyed the sensing compass. Otherwise, how would those Heaven Wasteland Palace assassins let him off? Yin Jiwei sensed from the sensing compass that the other assassins were very strong. Especially one of them. His strength seemed to be even more terrifying than his, and he actually had a cultivation close to the 9th level Heavenly Emperor. If this person rushed over, even his Silver Immortal Soul would probably be hard to contend. The crowd watched as the figure in white disappeared into the void, unable to react for a long time. Nie Tian's brows furrowed slightly, and he shook his head with a bitter smile, muttering, "Looks like I missed a good opportunity to kill Yin Jiwei previously." Yin Jiwei's Silver Immortal Soul was too strong, making Nie Tian have a trace of fear. The next time he met this person, he must kill him, and rid himself of future troubles. At the same time Yin Jiwei left, inside the Heaven Wasteland Great Hall. Chapter 1208. Despicable swordsmen of the Yin family, how dare you kill people of the Heaven Wasteland Palace? Song Shanshua stared at the spiritual array with bloodshot eyes. His body trembled slightly and his usually calm face was filled with rage. There were only 9 scarlet light spots left on the spiritual array. This meant that 4 of the 13 swords of heavenly desolation had died, leaving 9. The 13 swords of heavenly desolation was a top-notch swordsman that the Heaven Wasteland Palace had spent a lot of resources to nurture. How could Song Shanshua not be angry that they had died in the forbidden realm of Heaven Wasteland? The 13 swords of heavenly desolation was supposed to kill, but they were killed instead. This turn of events was too dramatic for Song Shanshua to accept. He had already sensed that the swordsman who killed Huang Shi and the others had used the Silver Immortal Sword intent. Without a doubt, he was from the Yin family. As the first and second sword sects of the 9 great sword sects, the Heaven Wasteland Palace and the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion had always been on bad terms. Now that the 13 swords of heavenly desolation had died in Yin Jiwei's hands, the relationship between the 2 sword sects became even more tense. However, Song Shanxue could not directly cause trouble for the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. The competition of swordsmanship was a gamble with one's life. No matter who it was, as long as they participated in it, they had to be willing to admit defeat. Senior brother, although Yin Jiwei is terrifying, I think there might be an even more terrifying person in the forbidden realm of Heaven Wasteland, the gloomy Duguanai said with a hint of mockery in his eyes. It had been a long time since he had seen Song Shanxue so angry. It was quite interesting to see it now. It's the swordsman who killed Huang Shi. Song Shanxue's eyes narrowed as he stared at the spiritual array with killing intent. He could naturally tell that it was the swordsman who had killed Huang Shi who had thrown the compass out to lure Yin Jiwei out. In the end, Huang Shi and the others were killed by Yin Jiwei. The deaths of Huang Shi and the others could be said to be caused by this person. This person's scheming is indeed rare, Song Shanxue said after calming down. The person that Song Shanxue and Duguanai were talking about was, of course, Nie Tian. Ever since Nie Tian entered the forbidden realm of Heaven Wasteland, he had crushed the spirit talisman and killed Huang Shi. After killing Huang Shi and the others, he had actually thrown it out and caused the deaths of Huang Shi and the others. Such scheming was indeed very deep. Song Shanxue furrowed his brows and said, "This person's strength isn't strong. He seems to be only at the 5th level of the Heavenly Emperor realm. However, his sword intent is a little complicated. There seems to be many types of sword intents in his body." Yes. The corner of Duguani's lips twitched. He had also noticed this. Nie Tian had more than one kind of sword intent. He let out a strange laugh and said, "If we don't get rid of this person, I'm afraid he will become a great threat in the future. I suggest that senior brother let Huang take action and kill this person first." First Desolation was a name that Duguanai had mentioned. It was the head of the 13 Swords of Desolation. Okay. Song Shanxue's eyes were deep like water. After thinking for a while, he finally nodded. For some reason, Song Shanxue had sensed a terrifying aura from Nie Tian's body through the sensing compass. It was faintly discernible and seemed very unreal. Maybe it was the perception of a swordsman that made Song Shanxue feel this way. He always felt that Nie Tian was much scarier than what he appeared to be. He even had a bad premonition that if Huang attacked, he might not be able to kill Nie Tian. Song Shanxue had this premonition, but he could not resist his desire for revenge. Finally, Song Shanxue raised his palm and a sensing compass appeared in his hand. It was much more complicated than the sensing compasses of the 13 Swords of Desolation. Song Shanxue's consciousness moved. A sword intent surged out and entered the sensing spiritual formation. It surged towards a crimson dot of light. This sword intent was the aura of Nie Tian's sword intent. Nie Tian did not have a talisman on him, so he could not be sensed. However, the moment he received the sensing compass, his sword intent was copied by Song Shanxue. At this moment, Song Shanxue was transferring Nie Tian's sword intent to Huang Wan. Seeing that Song Shanxue had transferred Nie Tian's sword intent to Huang Wan, Duguani's lips curled up slightly. He laughed sinisterly in his heart. Nie Tian, I wonder if you will survive if you meet Huang Wan now. Back then, you were someone that I feared. Now that you have been reborn, you shouldn't be too bad. Duguanai was now sure that the person in the forbidden region of Infinite Wasteland was Nie Tian. However, he did not plan to attack, nor did he plan to expose Nie Tian's identity. Nie Tian, the divine region of the heaven realm, is too boring now. I hope that your appearance can bring about some interesting changes. Duguani's eyes flickered as he thought to himself. Since there was an interesting opponent, it would be a pity to kill him now. However, Song Shanxue thought differently. If he knew that the person in the forbidden region of Infinite Wasteland was Nie Tian, he would definitely inform Emperor Chernin or that person immediately. Nie Tian must not be left alive. In the forbidden region of infinite wasteland in a thistle forest, a black-robed figure was lurking like a hunting lion, quietly waiting for its prey to appear. However, at this moment, he suddenly sensed something. He frowned and a compass appeared in his hand. A surge of sword intent appeared out of nowhere and surged within the compass. It's the sword intent from the palace master. The black-robed figure's eyes narrowed as he realized that the palace master wanted him to kill this person. The black-robed figure was none other than the head of the 13 Swords of Infinite Wasteland, Huang Wan. Huang Wan glanced at the compass and suddenly realized that there were only 9 scarlet dots left on the compass. He had never looked at the compass before, so he only discovered the abnormality now. It's Huang Shi and the others. Huang Wan stared at the compass and suddenly realized that 4 of the 13 Swords of Infinite Wasteland were already dead. As soon as Desolate understood, his eyes suddenly trembled, and his breathing became slightly hurried. His hawk-like eyes released terrifying flames of anger. But in just an instant, he calmed down and abruptly raised his head, locking onto an azure-robed figure ahead. "Sword Sovereign's disciple, I'll spare you this time," Huang Wan murmured in his heart. He had already followed that azure-robed figure for as long as an hour and did not make a move all along, waiting for the best opportunity. At this moment, knowing that his companions died tragically, he directly gave up. Huang Wan's figure moved and directly vanished. Gave up? How boring. Right after Huang Wan's figure disappeared, that azure-robed figure looked at the place where the former disappeared and shook his head with a smile, appearing rather disappointed. This was a young face with striking sword-like brows, handsome and bewitching. His age was below 50 years old, but his aura was incomparably vigorous. As the head of the 13 Swords of Infinite Wasteland, Huang Wan's strength reached peak 8th level Heavenly Emperor and even had high-level sword Profound Meaning, but he kept following this person and did not dare to casually make a move. It was enough to show that he was very wary of this person's strength. What was even stranger was that this person actually knew long ago that Huang Wan had been following him and was not afraid at all. Instead, he started playing a game of cat and mouse with the other party. This guy suddenly gave up and seems to have gone to find trouble with someone else. Could it be that there's someone more terrifying than me, Rennie Hong, who can arouse his interest? The corners of Rennie Hong's mouth curled, seemingly rather displeased. Then, he followed Huang Wan's aura. If Han Ling was here, he would definitely be able to recognize Ren Yihong at a glance because he had once cultivated together with the latter. Chapter 1209. In the forbidden region of Infinite Wasteland, Nie Tian and the others shuttled through the forest at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, they arrived outside a hidden valley. This valley is already at the edge of the forbidden region of Infinite Wasteland. There's no one inside, let's go in. Nie Tian spread out his divine sense, and after confirming that there was no one in the valley, his figure flashed and he directly entered. The others followed one after another. After landing, their tense nerves slightly relaxed. After witnessing the battle between Yin Jiwei and the assassins of Infinite Wasteland Palace, everyone was extremely shocked and still felt a lingering fear when they recalled it. Han Ling stood beside a boulder with his brows tightly knitted, as though he had a lot on his mind. "Han Ling, are you all right?" Lu Haoyu could not help but ask when he saw this scene. "Eldest senior brother, I'm fine." Han Ling forced a smile and said indifferently, but the worry between his brows was even heavier. Nie Tian glanced at Han Ling and immediately guessed what the latter was thinking, but he did not say it out loud. Han Ling must have seen Yin Jiwei's terrifying strength, so he was somewhat depressed. Yin Jiwei was already engaged to Qin Yu, but Han Ling was still infatuated with Qin Yu. The relationship between Yin Jiwei and Han Ling was somewhat subtle. The stronger the former was, the more uncomfortable the latter was. Currently, there was indeed a huge gap between Han Ling and Yin Jiwei. This was an undeniable fact, which was also the reason why the Sword Si Qin family chose Yin Ji Wei. Nie Tian was very puzzled. Han Fei's talent in sword principle was not bad, so Han Ling should be very strong. Why was he so weak? Perhaps Han Ling had carried too much hatred since he was young, which affected his martial heart, causing his strength to improve too slowly. Next, Nie Tian planned to hide in the valley for a period of time, and then come out when the time was right. Senior brother, teacher said that your sword intent is an extremely rare triple attribute sword intent. If you can combine the three attributes together, you will definitely reach the peak of sword principle. At this time, even Pu Fifan could see that Han Ling's mood was not right, and said seriously, "Little junior brother, don't comfort me. I know what my talent is." Han Ling forced a smile, and his expression was gloomy. Triple attribute sword intent? Nie Tian could not help but be stunned when he heard Pu Fifan's words, and his gaze involuntarily froze. There really are 3 types of sword intents in this world? That's impossible, right? Xiao Yun was also stunned and said in astonishment, "A tri-elemental sword intent." This kind of sword intent was indeed very strange, which was why Nie Tian and Xiao Yun were so surprised. The sword intent was the same as the origin spirit, it was also divided into attribute. Under normal circumstances, a sword intent could only have one attribute, but some special sword intents could have 2 attributes at the same time. For example, Nie Tian's Thunderbolt sword essence was of the thunder attribute and belonged to a normal sword essence. On the other hand, the Sword Si Qin clan's Golden Sun sword intent was a dual attribute sword intent. It was a metal and fire sword intent, possessing both the toughness of metal and the heat of fire. Multi-attributed sword intents were the same as multi-attributed Yuan spirits. They also had the distinction of mutually exclusive and compatible attribute. The Golden Sun sword intent's 2 attributes, metal and fire, could fuse and promote each other, allowing it to erupt with a much stronger power than the average single-attributed sword intent. However, if it was water and fire attributes, then this kind of sword intent would have almost no power at all. This was because these 2 attributes repelled each other and would clash against each other, causing their powers to cancel each other out. Dual attribute sword intents were extremely rare. The number of dual attribute sword intents that Nie Tian knew of could be counted on one hand. His eldest disciple, Han Fei, had a Thunderflame sword intent with both thunder and fire attribute. As for a triple attribute sword intent, to be honest, this was the first time Nie Tian had heard of it. It was already not easy for a dual attribute sword intent to be compatible with each other. It was almost impossible for a triple attribute sword intent to exist because the repulsion between the attributes was too strong. Han Ling, do you really have a triple attribute sword intent? Nie Tian took a step forward and asked nervously. Han Ling nodded. However, his eyes were dim and he seemed to be extremely disappointed. What about the 3 attributes? Release your sword intent, I want to have a look. Nie Tian's eyes flickered. He had never paid much attention to Han Ling's sword intent before, so he didn't notice anything strange. But now it had attracted his attention. Xiao Yun and the rest also had a look of anticipation on their faces. They all wanted to see how strange a triple attribute sword intent would be. All right. Han Ling forced a smile. Following which, waves of sword intent surged out from his body and condensed into a sword silhouette. There were actually 3 different colors circulating around the sword silhouette: red, yellow, and green. It really is a triple attribute sword intent. Nie Tian's divine sense moved. His eyes couldn't help but tremble as he said, "It's actually the 3 attributes of fire, metal, and wood. It is indeed strange." Xiao Yun and the rest were also trembling with joy. Metal, fire, and wood, 3 attributes could coexist. It was really unimaginable. At this time, Nie Tian suddenly understood why Han Ling's strength increased so slowly. It must be because he couldn't fuse the three attributes in his sword intent. Therefore, his sword Tao realm couldn't increase, and his strength was also suppressed. Metal, fire, and wood, these three attributes were indeed difficult to fuse. Nie Tian was very curious about how Han Ling could condense such a strange sword intent. Han Ling, what is your origin spirit? After calming down, Nie Tian suddenly asked. Nie Tian guessed that the reason why Han Ling could condense such a strange sword intent might be related to his origin spirit. It's a sword spirit. Han Ling answered, and a strange black heavy sword appeared in his hand. The body of the sword was very thick, and the blade was very blunt, as if it wasn't sealed. Sword spirit. Nie Tian's divine sense moved, and he carefully sensed the black sword in Han Ling's hand. His expression slowly became complicated, and he had a strange expression. After a long time, he asked, "What is your origin spirit called?" Senior brother's sword spirit is called 5 Elements Prison Breaking. Before Han Ling could speak, Pu Fifan rushed to say, "Teacher said that the 5 Elements Prison Breaking contains the power of the 5 elements." 5 Elements Prison Breaking. Hearing this name, Nie Tian's eyes darkened again, and he said in surprise, "No wonder, I actually sense the aura of the 5 elements." Nie Tian never thought that Han Ling's 5 Elements Prison-Breaking origin spirit actually had the power of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It was really terrifying. Han Ling's origin spirit was actually a 5 Elements Prison-Breaking origin spirit. This was too terrifying, and it was shocking. No wonder Han Ling could condense such a strange sword intent. It turned out that his origin spirit was very strange. However, Nie Tian sensed that the 5 elements within the 5 elements prison breaking were not uniform. The 3 elements of metal, fire, and wood were relatively strong, while the 2 elements of water and earth were relatively weak. Han Ling, let me see your sword intent again. At this time, Nie Tian suddenly thought of something, and he hurriedly said. Han Ling was stunned for a moment, and he didn't know what Nie Tian had discovered, but he still released his sword intent again. This time, Nie Tian's eyes suddenly became hot, and he released the holographic divine glyphs to sense Han Ling's sword intent bit by bit. Then, as if he had found a treasure, he suddenly became ecstatic, and he couldn't help but laugh out loud. As expected, this is not a 3-element sword intent, but a 5-element sword intent, containing the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The 5-element sword intent was really too terrifying, and Nie Tian couldn't help but be ecstatic.